Call to order the City Council / successor agency to the Redevelopment Agency meeting of the City of San Carlos, November 25th, 2013. And would you please rise and we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Are there any changes to the order of the agenda?
No changes from staff this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, anyone else? All right, move on to item 4, report from closed session. Mr. Rubens?
There are no reportable items from the closed session.
Reportable items, all right. For 5, council communications and announcements. Ms. Clapper?
Yes, I wanted to let the council know I attended the Peninsula Congestion Management Relief, otherwise known as the Alliance, or commute.org, this last Monday. And for the coming year, Jeff G. was selected as the new chair, and Elizabeth Lewis was selected as the vice chair. There was an interesting presentation about the topic of car sharing, which covered a very broad spectrum of issues in which people may not own a vehicle but may be using it, including the use of what are being called autonomous vehicles, which are driverless vehicles that are programmed. It was a very interesting discussion that those are apparently on their way, coming to us soon. Will probably be used in Europe and Japan first before they come here. In addition, they shared with us that shuttle ridership on the shuttles is up 6% year to date, and the use of the commuter ferries is up 100%, probably driven quite a bit by the BART strikes. And as I had mentioned after the last Alliance meeting, I would encourage staff and the council to have John Ford, the executive director, come in and give a presentation to keep all of the council informed about how those shuttles are being operated and what the opportunities are for employers here in San Carlos to be able to participate in having their employees ride on those shuttles. The second of my 3 items is that this last Sunday, which was yesterday morning, that we had an exercise for the CERT team, which is the Community Emergency Response Team, over at the Provident Credit Union in Redwood Shores. It was attended by 24 volunteers, and I was very pleased that one of our San Carlos residents, Therese Ruth, is volunteering as the assistant coordinator. And we divided up into 4 teams, investigated the inside of the credit union building, where they actually had staged over 15 different victims, 4 of whom were deceased. So it was a very excellent practice for that, sizing up the outside of the building, identifying damage, and also going through the Redwood Shores community, where some of the community members participated by putting signs in their windows indicating whether they were okay or not okay from the results of a regional disaster. And it was an excellent training opportunity, and I wanted to thank all of the people who volunteered for that, as well as the credit union for donating the first floor of their building. And the last item I have is from the Council of Cities meeting this past Friday evening, which was very good. Several of the council-elect members from some of the other cities came in and got an opportunity to meet people there. And there was an excellent presentation put on by the county regarding pet services, the Peninsula Humane Society, because they're looking at replacing the building that we currently have to the tune of about $20 million, so that all of the cities would be sharing in that. So it would be the county, right now the Humane Society owns the building. They're looking at the county would be building it, and all of the cities would be participating. So I brought back a copy of the report that was shared with everyone at the meeting, and I'll give it to staff so that they can then forward it on to the council, and because I'm sure this is an item that will be discussed at a future meeting. Currently our share is $177,000 a year. San Mateo is paying over $800,000 a year. So it's something that all of the cities are very interested in taking a greater look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clapper. I appreciate that report coming to us. That would be interesting. Mr. Collins?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of things. Last week, I attended the meeting of the Caltrain Electrification Task Force, and that is all proceeding. We're meeting about every other month now. I think probably the most interesting thing to report is that the ridership was 28,000 people per day in 2004. Today, it's over 50,000. And the Caltrain, even despite that rise in numbers, still has an operating deficit. We don't know the number exactly. I asked to have that number, but it was about 30 million. The good news is that it's shrinking, but apparently it's not shrinking fast enough. And as some of you may have read, there has been a study done to find out what to do with the train yard in San Francisco, because eventually there's going to be an extension all the way to First and Mission, and the city of San Francisco would like to build more housing on that site. And so there was a study done to find out how that could be done and how that would impact Caltrain. And they found that what they want to do is build basically a podium and build development over that. But it still has a long way to go, probably 10 to 15 years. On a more interesting note, I had the pleasure of being interviewed last week by a young man who lives on my street. He's a Cub Scout, and his Cub Scout project was to interview a person from the city council. And so I met him here, and he interviewed the city manager. He interviewed the director of Parks and Recreation. I think the most exciting part of his trip, though, was his tour, though, was when I showed him where they park all the police cars downstairs. But he loved sitting in. I had him sit in the mayor's chair, by the way.
By the way, just to interject, I think the most exciting part was when he actually got to meet the mayor. I met him before you, so I just thought I'd throw that out.
Oh, you were here. You never told me about it.
I don't have to, I'm the mayor.
Well, what can I say? Anyway, gave him a nice tour with his mom, and when he sat in the chair, we had a hard time prying him out of it. So I think we may have a future mayor coming up in about maybe 10 or 15 years. Anyway, it was very nice. It was nice to be able to show somebody what goes on in our city hall. I'm not sure he totally understood all of it. He is, after all, 9, but his mom had a great time too, and it was kind of fun showing him around.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interject, but
I didn't know you met him.
Yeah, his mother said, "That's the mayor," or actually, he said, "That's the mayor." Anyway, never mind. Another story. Mr. Grocott.
The only thing I have to report is I'm trying to go paper-free tonight, for the most part. Use this iPad, so if you go too fast, I may fall off the cart. Yeah. That's it.
I'm going to try to work on that in 2014. Mr. Collins, you had one more thing.
The only other thing I wanted to mention is this young man's name is Dario Salazar, and I didn't want his name to go unmentioned.
Okay. Mr. Olbert?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A few things here. I attended, on behalf of the council, the recent SBWMA, basically the trash agency, board meeting in November. There was no vote or agenda item, actually, even on the issue of contract workers at the recycling facility that you may recall we talked about, the transfer station. We did, however, set the tipping fees, which is basically the fees that get charged for anybody, including Recology, after they pick up the trash from our community, to dump it off at the transfer station. That led to an interesting discussion because those rates are adopted basically on a cost-plus basis and then checked against what's in the market. And several of us brought up the point of maybe we ought to do it the other way around and see what the market rates for those are and see how to operate the transfer station for less than that, which I think will bear some interesting fruit in the future. There was also an item where there was a discussion about what to do with excess funds remaining from funds that the prior operator, Allied, BFI, had left to remediate some groundwater or ground pollution that was on the site. And it's a fairly substantial sum of money, in excess of like $1.3 or $1.4 million, if I recall correctly. And no decisions were made, but I did make a pitch to the board that basically said that the reason they have the money left over is they determined that they don't need to clean up what's there as intensively as had first been thought. And so I made the pitch basically to say that since this was in San Carlos, I would really appreciate them thinking about spending the money to clean it up, even if they didn't have to do it. So we'll see what that does. I also attended the City County Association of Governments Congestion Management and Environmental Quality Subcommittee meeting. And just for Mr. Mayor, when it comes before CCAG as a whole, we added an item for the shuttle program, where they're having the grant program. I asked them to add in, under the needs assessment, you can now include a discussion of whether you're reducing congestion. And I would encourage staff to look into that to see whether there's some shuttle program that either the city could run or the city, perhaps in conjunction with the school district, might be able to put together to take advantage of this. So that's what I have.
Okay. I just have one thing. We had some young people from our sister city in Mexico and presented us with a couple of items about their area, a beautiful book, which we're going to be giving to the museum. And we have a proclamation from the mayor of Metepec, Mexico. That's our sister city. We also have a handmade, I'm not sure what you would call this, not an icon per se, but some sort of a decorative item that also I think would be going to the museum. And last but not least, a lovely sombrero, which quite honestly is the most amazing thing I've seen in as a sombrero. Someone asked if I wanted to wear this during the meeting, but I think maybe that probably wouldn't work too well. Might bump into people, but it's a lovely piece. And the main point of this is that we have a wonderful sister city, Metepec, in Mexico, and these items will be in our history museum, I believe. It's the best place for them, I think, to make sure that everyone in the community has a chance to look at them and see where what we're doing. So. Should I come down? No, I wouldn't do that. Because soon enough, I'm going to be ex-mayor. So. Anyway, so let me put this back here also.
Is there one more item on the floor?
No, I just slipped off. It's just a...
Actually, Mr. Mayor, I think there's more clearance room on the staff table.
Right. Maybe we'll just say if... Well, anyway, that's another story. All right. Moving on to presentations. The item first listed is San Carlos Library Annual Report, but before we get to that, we have three members of the San Carlos Lions Club here, and they're going to be presenting us with some flags. Do you have a microphone there for me? One up, folks, please. Thank you very much. So, why don't you identify yourself, who you are and stuff.
Good evening. My name is Linda. Is it on? My name is Linda Ferrari. And I'm with San Carlos Lions.
Nice web.
I want to make sure everybody hears what we have. So, please.
We're here at the San Carlos Lions Club with their
Great.
so our U.S. flag and also.
Thank you very much. These are the ones that never mind. These are the ones that fly in front of City Hall.
Correct.
Right, great. It's something I have to admit, I don't know. Annual basis? Okay, good. Thank you so much. The San Carlos Lions Club, one of the great community organizations that we have in town. And again, every time I stand up here, I always say, this is why this is such a great community. Because everyone participates, and we're gratefully accept those flags. And we'll fly them proudly. Thank you so much, folks, for coming. Appreciate it. Okey-doke. The next item we have is the San Carlos Library Annual Report. Thank you for waiting, Mr. Mulaka. Appreciate that. By the way, how is our new library working out?
It's working perfectly. Thank
Great.
you for asking. Thank you, Mayor Grisilli and members of the City Council. It is my pleasure to present the San Mateo County Library Report for the 2012-2013 fiscal year. This report, enclosed in your packet, shares evidence and stories about the ways the library enhances the community and delivers outstanding service. The communities served by our branch libraries, including San Carlos, are widely supported and utilized by a high percentage of residents who find libraries an enriching staple of community life and of their own lives. To continue flourishing, our county library branches are finding new ways to reflect our mission statement, which reads, Connect, Discover, Evolve. The San Carlos Library has connected with well over 300,000 visitors who discovered and borrowed 500,000 items, books, audiovisual items, and downloadable sources. Over 20,000 people made our library their destination and enjoyed 1,000 programs, many of which were presented by talented local residents in addition to library staff members. To further our mission statement, our library services are constantly evolving. Recognizing the importance of mobile media in our lives, the library continues to add digital resources with database reading and listening options. This year, we have made over 100 popular magazines available in digital format via our Zinio e-magazine subscriptions. To help patrons connect with potential employers, we introduced Job Scout, an online learning and social media platform that teaches basic internet skills and job hunting techniques. Very recently, we added a service named Freegal, which allows library card holders to download music without cost. For the San Carlos Library, it's been a significant year. In May, we closed for 5 months of extensive interior renovations. The library reopened on November 2nd as a state-of-the-art facility, featuring newly designed spaces for teens and casual readers, an expanded, colorful, and playful children's room, complete with toddler-appropriate computer learning stations, a dynamic discovery area that encourages browsing by displaying high-interest books, films, and music, zone public computers with laptops available for loan, and wireless printing now an option. Also improved lighting and finishes throughout. And we're not done yet. We've got improvements yet to be installed on the way. In addition to the improvements we make to our physical space, library visitors will also find our collections organized in a new, intuitive, user-friendly manner. The San Carlos Library is the second library in California to retire the Dewey Decimal System in favor of an easier word-based system of classifying nonfiction books. For example, no longer will you need to know the difference between 902.22 and 229.90. You'll know your book is either in the history or religion aisle and find it quicker. Our improvement project was the result of years of collaborative planning and hard work on the part of the City of San Carlos and San Mateo County Library staff. We wish to thank the City of San Carlos, the Friends of the San Carlos Library, and our many volunteers and individual donors for helping us provide stellar service to all residents of San Carlos and San Mateo County. This abundant support makes the San Carlos Library a vital center of community activity. We thank the Council for your continuing support of the library and welcome questions or comments.
Thank you, Mr. Luaka. Questions for Mr. Luaka? Just the library looks great. A lot of, well, hopefully you're getting all your former patrons back to come and visit.
We were very busy the first day. We had 1,400 people come through the doors.
Wow.
Circulated 2,100 items.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good. I'm glad to see it's building back up. Thank you so much for your report.
welcome. Thank you.
Appreciate it. The next item on our agenda is public comment. Persons wishing to address the City Council on matters not on the posted agenda. Each speaker is limited to 2 minutes, and we need to, if you would like to speak, we have a card to fill out, or you can fill it out after you speak. Right now I have 2 cards, and the first one is Andre Carpio. Mr. Carpio? Chris, could you just tap him? Mr. Carpio? You're up. Thanks, Chris.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Andre Carpio. I come here tonight, like I've come many other nights, to claim my solar car that was stolen here in San Carlo. There has been no progress since about 10 years ago, and I'm trying to find out if there is going to be ever a solution. And I'm requesting that the City Council take a look at the matter and let me know, either verbally or in writing, if I should pursue the matter or not, and the reason if I should not pursue the matter. The second item I want to mention is that at the last City Council meeting, Mr. Councilman Ober made a presentation that was, in my opinion, derogatory to Sam-Tram. And this is his own opinion, and I don't think that as a City Council is proper to address the public on an issue that is a minority. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carpio, for your comments. The next speaker card I have is Mr. Vandellis.
I'm here to address some items that are currently slated for, I guess, the consent calendar. And I want to bring some up because it said that we're supposed to provide our feedback, public feedback on consent calendar items.
Well, if we have a consent calendar item, Mr. Vandellis, we can pull it off for you, and that's when we comment on that, not during public comment.
Okay, so is that, can I make that request now?
Absolutely. Just let me know.
The Transit Village Plan
Okay,
Development.
which number is that? Do you have, or letter is it?
I believe it's I.
I? Okay. Yeah, we'll be happy to pull that off. We traditionally, well, we'll see. We'll pull that off for you. Thank you. Next speaker card I have is Ben Fuller.
Hello, City Council. Please pardon my being late. Good to see you guys. I wanted to just bring up an unrelated issue, the shuttles. I'm trying to understand what the process is. I've heard from all of you that they're going to be moved. I've heard from the Planning Commission, but now it's going back through the Planning, Transit and Circulation Commission, and it seems like they're sort of devoid of a lot of the context of this long discussion, and so it's like almost like we're starting the whole thing over. Now we've been getting contacted by Samtrans asking us for feedback on how to fix the problem that we've been talking about for many years that evidently didn't exist, but now I guess they're acknowledging does exist. What I'd like to ask is that we focus, instead of on the shuttles, which I understand is a fait accompli, and that they're going to be moved, and I'm hoping that's still the case, on the garbage. I don't understand. I mean, I was actually meeting with some other guys in the city, and what happened to the art of like leaning over? How hard is this to do? To just lean over, pick up something off the ground? I don't see why that can't work, and I don't know if it's the city's issue or if it's Samtrans' issue. I know that there's a nexus right there on the ramp between where the city and Samtrans picks up garbage, but whatever the case is, it's a little bit of a who's on first situation, and there is a new ombuds person over at Samtrans, Shveta, who is supposed to be helping us resolve these kind of issues, but we haven't resolved the garbage issue yet. So I just implore all of us to find a way to make that place a little better. One other thing I want to point out is related to Eastside Connect. So Eastside Connect started in earnest on Friday. They took out all the sidewalks on Montgomery and Cherry Street, which is a huge landmark for our neighborhood. Thank you to you guys for voting for it. One thing that happened, though, is that the cones, the orange cones, were left against the curb, and so everybody would have been expected to literally walk on the dirt. And on Old County Road, with it raining, that's not a very good thing. So I personally moved about 50 cones 3 feet into the roadway on Old County Road and made my own safety decision for my neighborhood. And I just would ask you guys, I'm going to work with these guys directly, but we just want to make sure that people can be safe, the pedestrians can be safe walking up and down there through Eastside Connect. And thanks again for voting for it, and I'm sure my 2 minutes is more than up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on public comment? Okay. We'll move on to item 8, which is the approval of consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine and be enacted by one motion, no separate discussion unless items are moved by council, staff, or public to discuss individually. So, any other items besides I that was Mr. Vandellis had? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve consent calendar items 8A through H and J and K.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Councilmember Clapper?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
I just noticed, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, I had voted against the sign ordinance.
Okay.
So if it could just, I don't want to necessarily pull it or anything, but it
Understand. No,
would just be
we'll-
noted that I'm still,
Can we do that, Mr. Rubens?
We've done that in the past, and I'd just like the council to read that the ordinance title and what on the adoption as well.
Which one, on J?
It's
Sorry.
G.
G? Okay. Would someone read the ordinance on G?
Excuse me, F and G.
Okay, F and G.
Hang on a second.
it's two things.
F is ordinance number 1466, an ordinance of the City of San Carlos adopting amendments to the San Carlos zoning ordinance, Title 18 of the San Carlos Municipal Code, Chapter 18.22, sign ordinance pertaining to billboards on city property.
Okay, and would someone read the next one, please?
Same attachment.
1467.
Ordinance number 1467, an ordinance of the City of San Carlos adopting amendments to San Carlos Municipal Code, Chapter 12.28, regulations for signs on city property pertaining to billboards.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Olbert, for doing that. So let the record show that Mr. Grocott voted aye on all but item, I'm sorry, which one?
G and H, I think
G.
it is. Yeah. Did I vote
G
it
and
no?
H? F and G?
Oh, I'm sorry, F and G.
Okay.
Yeah.
And continue the roll call, please.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes,
For the rest
as
of
noted.
Those two.
Yeah.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. I'm going to, most of the time when we take something out of, off the consent calendar, we put it at the end of the meeting, but I'm going to move it. I think we should discuss it now, because a member of the public is the one who brought this up. So, did you have some comments, Mr. Vandellis, on this? Or some questions, please?
Yeah, so I have a number of comments. So at the last city council meeting, I feel you guys went in the proper direction, but I do feel that the job was rushed. And rushing the transit village, lots of details were missed, details regarding mitigations, the financials, the loss of view corridors, brought up by Councilman Mac Grocott. They weren't deliberated or discussed. So I'm concerned about that. There's nothing about building design and articulation called out in the packet along the east side. There's some contradictory areas regarding landscaping. In one section, it talks about additional trees to completely screen Building 8. In another section, it just talks about additional trees through Buildings 1 through 7. So I'm not sure which one is which. The tree fund feels like it's being underfunded significantly. And I didn't see anything about shuttles and park funds. Part of this might be due to the fact that there's a huge segment of, there's attachment 1, Exhibit C, and that there's an error 404 for every one of those files, so there was no way for the public to review the documents. So it seems like you guys are, the city's out of compliance for public notification. So I don't know what's in there. No one in the public knows what's in there. So I don't know how we can go forward. That's my comment.
Okay, thank you. There's no other discussion?
Mr. Mayor?
Sure, Ms. Grocott.
I intended to pull this item, and I do have some questions and had some items to discuss. You mind if I go through those now?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. I guess the item is moved to this part of the meeting, so.
Yeah. Well, again, normally, we'd put it at the end, but because the public pulled it, I think we should discuss it now, and we'll settle, a reasonable time limit on it, and we'll go from there. Go ahead.
Okay. First, I was curious if I had a couple of questions for staff, and then I wanted to point out some things to council, see if there's any interest in discussing it. The first question I had for staff, I just wanted to verify the process we're going through, which was we introduced an ordinance, which is what we voted to do last time. Tonight would be voting to actually approve the ordinance, correct?
Right.
Or adopt it, yeah.
Correct.
Okay. A couple of questions I had for, I guess it's this lady here, is what we ended up with on the unit count per acre, because what I was doing was looking at the mixed-use station area. You had told me one time to go look at attachment something or other, I forget what it was, the attachment number, that looked at all the exceptions to mixed-use station area. And my understanding from reading it again through over the weekend is that still the underlying zoning is still mixed-use station area, and we're making exceptions and outlining what those exceptions are.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Councilmember Grocott, the property is actually being zoned PD. There is an underlying zoning, which is the MUSA district, and we have identified within the conditions of approval the particular development standards that are being flexed through the approval of the PD. Does that help?
Yes, to some extent it does. It helps. The thing that I was not convinced about is, well, at one point I felt like when I was reading through this, okay, what we've done is, to use it, to borrow a phrase, throwing the mixed-use station area zoning out the window and then using it, or creating a new one. But I didn't see in anything that I looked at quite all the detail that's in the mixed use. I read all the way through mixed use station area, and there's quite a bit of detail there. When I looked through the documents that I had, at least, which were mostly from the last meeting, or the last time we met, I could find most of them, but I couldn't find all of them. And so I still had some things that I was unclear on. And one of them was, for instance, mixed-use station area talks about 50 units per acre. And then when I met with the city manager about the project, I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday after we had our meeting and voted to introduce the ordinance, one of the things that was pointed out is that there's really no unit count per se, because even though we talked about it at the council meeting and we talked about, well, if we knock it down to 3 stories, we'll end up with so many units. Mr. Malpe's comment to me was we really didn't set any particular unit count. The developer's still free to take the mass and fit the units into the mass as the developer sees fit.
So the condition of approval that was included in Alternative B, which the approval was basically built upon, indicated 251 units, but that it could go to 260, but there was a bedroom count that you couldn't exceed. This approval basically creates a mass, a volume. We still say that the buildings, their location and their general massing is as shown in the plans, except now that the 4th story has been taken off all of those buildings. So they would still have the ability to do more 1-bedrooms and 2-bedrooms, fewer 3-bedrooms, which would change the unit count. If we simply looked at the buildings, just the top floors being taken off, that resulted in 336 units.
So what did you just say, that the maximum number of units is 260? Have we set any unit count?
No, we have not.
We have not. So we don't have a figure like is in the mixed-use station area. It says there's 50 units per acre is the maximum. We don't know what our unit count per acre is.
But given the volume, it would be unlikely that they'd be able to get to that, let alone exceed it.
My point isn't trying to get to 50 units. My point is the mixed-use station area does set a per acre count. It doesn't seem to me like we've set any count whatsoever.
Okay.
Am I correct on that? That's my question.
Well, again, it's still regulated by the general plan, and it's still related to the underlying district. So I would say that the 50 units per acre, which comes from the general plan, would still apply to this site.
But you just told me that when we threw out the mixed-use station area as the zoning, and it's now PD, we're creating the zoning specific to the site. So wouldn't that allow us to say this is the unit count?
If you wanted to include a specific unit count, I'm going to look to the city attorney about how you wanted to do that. If you wanted to add in a specific, modify the conditions to include a specific number of maximum units.
And I'll add real quick before the city attorney jumps in. My recollection of the motion that was approved by the city council at the last meeting was, I think it was option B, with a modification to remove the third story. And option B contained, fourth story. And option B contained a not to exceed unit count of 265 units. So I think there's a maximum of 265 as approved by the city council. That's also linked to a bedroom count.
That language is shown as being struck, but could it be unstruck?
3G. Yeah, so Mr. Surveyor, Community Development Director, just pointed out that, was it 3G, was struck, and that is a typographical error, so that'll be added back in.
So it's
And that contains the
265.
265 maximum, yes.
Sorry, my first little thing here happened. The thing froze up. Great.
Or on my paper?
No, I have enough here. So 265 is the number. Is that correct?
The language reads, with these changes, the maximum number of residential units is 251. However, the unit count may be adjusted to not exceed 265 units, provided that the adjustment does not result in more than 469 bedrooms.
Okay. All right. Well, it's good to have an answer on that, and thank you. Let me see if these are for you, the other questions I had. Have we, there's a part in the mixed-use station area that talks about building placement, and I understand we've set a different number than the 20 feet from El Camino, along El Camino, from the back of the curb. I guess
We
it's
didn't
either...
set a number. We said that it's 15 feet, I believe, is the standard from El Camino. We said that the placement of the buildings was as shown on the PD plans.
On the plans.
So most of those buildings do maintain a 15-foot setback, but there are, as the unit count comes along and the street's moving, there are eclipse corners of various units that have less than.
So that, let me just put it a different way then, because I have a number of questions about building placement, and the concern I have is that, as I had pointed out before, we had that booklet that I picked up off the floor back here that Mr. Mayor had brought with him, and you said that was an attachment and it's part of the ordinance and so forth, but now we've changed so many things, so what applies, what doesn't apply. I guess my concern is that we've knocked a floor off, and the developer may want to get back some of his units, and so for instance, Building 1 has a very deep courtyard right now. Well, could the developer fill in that courtyard with some units and stay to, the mixed-use station area calls for common courts like that to be at least 20 feet deep. What he's showing now, what the developer's showing now is far greater than that, but to gain back units, maybe they decide to reduce the depth of that courtyard. Or, stay with me if you would, right now the plans show certain footprints of these buildings, and one of the concerns I had before was the distance between the buildings. So I could see, again, that distance being reduced in order to gain back some of the units. I don't see that we did anything to lay those lines down. That's, again, as a residential designer, when I work on projects, I'm used to, this is your setback here, this is your interior side setback, you've got setbacks from, like if you do a detached garage, it can't be anything more than 10 feet from the building. So what about these building footprints? Are they allowed to change?
Through the chair, isn't all of this going to be discussed when we go, all the design gets through the planning commission and go through all that? We didn't design the building last week.
Yeah, there's a considerable amount of work on the project that needs to be done in design review. However, the placement of the buildings, there are, I'm sure will be some tweaks in the design review process, but the overall footprints, my understanding is they are set by the action that the council.
Well, that's what I meant. The footprint. So to allay Mr. Grocot's comment about moving that interior courtyard isn't going to happen.
I would
And
say
if it does,
it's
if
unlikely.
it does, it comes back to us anyway.
Yeah, if it
And we
was
can
a
change it again.
significant, if it was a significant enough change,
We'd move it back.
right?
We
We have the power to do that.
Yes, and part of what you're approving is the PD. In the PD itself, the booklet also contains development standards, which I believe reference the courtyards. But I'm looking at B2, and it says the general location and scale of the buildings are approved subject to the conditions of approval. So where they've been placed on the property, relative to property lines, relative to each other, is what's been approved.
Can you repeat that first part again? The what? The first part of what you said there about what's been approved.
Part of what you've approved there's a PD booklet with plans and
Right.
with design guidelines or criteria that are included. Plus, there's conditions of approval, which are attached here, that will become part of that booklet and will be part of the PD. And I'm saying here, under B2, it says the general location and scale of the proposed buildings are approved subject to the conditions of approval. So again, part of what you've done is you've said, here's where the buildings get to be and their general scale. One of your conditions of approval says, but the fourth floor on all these buildings must be removed.
See, that's what I was looking at is on item K, because you had told me to look at a certain attachment, Exhibit B, which I did, and item K says, allow the residential building length to exceed 125 feet and to be the general length and location shown in the PD plan.
That's
Well,
correct.
I could drive a truck through the word general, and that's what I'm concerned about. So, yeah, that's not free. I'm
Again-
asking you the question. I'm not trying to debate with you. If I'm going to debate, I'll debate with my council members. I'm just asking you the question. So, that one is for council discussion. This is a question I had with the city manager, and I did not get a very good response, not because he didn't try, but when I met with the city manager, I told him one of the concerns I had, and I mentioned it the night we voted, was the sight lines to the depot, the angle of the sight lines based on the footprints of these buildings, buildings 7 and 8. And I wanted to see that increased. So I asked the city manager, how much could we tweak that? Is what Mr. Mayor said, this is going to come back to us, designs, so forth and so on. But if we tried to, in the design part of it, increase that angle based on your knowledge of the PD that we're approving, can we do that in the design phase?
But again, you have approved the general scale and location of the building, so it depends, just as on one of the other buildings, if they ended up relocating a stairwell and we had a little 2-foot jog for, 5 feet along the side of the building, I would say that that's substantially consistent, even though it's not the exact same footprint.
Sure.
And similarly here, but if you're talking about
I'm talking about going from a
Moving
20-degree
that-
angle to something like a 40-degree angle, which really affects, I know that it affects building, excuse me, in the back. I don't need the body language.
Again, it would
Mr.
be,
Grocott, Mr. Grocott,
The
let's
30,
pay attention to what we're
it's
doing.
going from a 20-degree angle to a, I'm trying to, and I'm getting a distraction from the back row there, from a 20-degree angle to a 40-degree angle, and that was Mr. Maltby's comment to me. That would be pretty substantial. You probably couldn't do it.
so if you were making a minor thing, you were, chamfering a corner of the
Yeah.
building, something like that, I think we could do that through design review. If you're relocating the buildings, moving them around on the site, or substantially changing, reducing the footprint or turning it on its ear, then I think we're really talking about an amendment to the PD.
Okay, all right. And my last question, again, as it pertains to the PD, one of the things that I got asked by people right after the meeting, and then the next day, next couple of days, when I saw folks downtown, was, so what's the height of the buildings? And my answer was, I really don't know. Because, and if you could help me out here, then, based on what you know about the PD, we've set the number of floors, but on so many, except for 2 of the buildings, 7 and 8, we really haven't set a height limit.
That's
Correct?
correct.
That's what I thought. Okay. All right, thank you.
However, but given the context, I mean, we do have drawings that show a typical floor to ceiling for those buildings. The administrative record's clear about the desire for removing that was to reduce visibility. So restoring those buildings to a 50-foot height limit is neither consistent with the plans, which showed a more typical 10-foot, ceiling to ceiling angle, and it wouldn't be consistent with the nature of the council's action and direction on it.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so any other questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion. We need to read the ordinance.
Yeah, I move that we approve ordinance number 1468, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Carlos approving the San Carlos Transit Village Plan Development Plan and related zoning map amendment to rezone the railroad corridor bounded by the Caltrain tracks on the east, El Camino Real on the west, the northern boundary of assessor's parcel number 050-055-020 on the north, and the city's municipal boundary with Redwood City on the south, from mixed-use station area, MU-SA, and mixed-use South Boulevard, MUSB zoning districts to planned development, P-D zoning district.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I would really, to start some discussion, I'd really like to know what's the urgency to get this thing off the dais. It seems like we're rushing things along. As I said to the city manager when I met with him, I felt rushed. And as I saw it, the only thing we really discussed, had any discussion on, was the low-income housing quotas, or whatever you want to call them. And when we got to the project, the PD part of it, sure, we had our questions, we had public comment, and then I brought up a number of issues, same as I brought up tonight, and there's more that I didn't bring up with the consultant here because it really wasn't a question for her, it was more of a discussion item. But I feel really frustrated because the things I brought up I know it was like 1:45 to midnight, what I saw, the body language down here was, let them finish, and then we're going to vote. But none of these issues that I brought up about and some of them I forgot because we were going along so quickly. For instance, I forgot to bring up about the views of the historic depot and my concerns there. But there was no discussion. I brought up the points, and there was absolutely no discussion on any of the items.
Well, it could be, Mr. Grocott, that you're the only one that wants to discuss these. Did you ever think of that? Because we didn't have any comment because maybe we didn't agree with you.
So
I'm
what
just saying maybe.
what the council is telling me, what you are telling me, Mr. Mayor, is you have no concern about the views of the train station. You have no concern about building articulation.
Don't do that.
These are the
Don't
things
put
I brought
words in
up.
my mouth,
Well, then tell me what it is.
I don't have a problem with this project. It went through four.
Well, that's what I just said.
It
You
went through
have no
four-
problem with the views of the train
You asked me a
station.
question. Could I speak?
Sure, speak all you want.
Okay. Well, you asked me a question. It went through four. First of all, we went through the environmental impact report, which had at least 4 to 5 meetings in Planning Commission, and at least one. I think we had at least. Well, I know we had one, if not 2 meetings on ours. Thank you. We went through the process. Another 4 meetings for Planning Commission, and we went through 2 meetings with ours. Lots of points were raised. Some were discussed, some weren't. Some people agreed with your comments. Some people agreed with mine. Some people agreed with Mr. Olbert's, and some people disagreed with some of all of ours. So like I said, you have comments. That's fine. You have questions. That's fine. Obviously, when we voted, 3 people decided that other issues or no issues overrode what your concerns were. So 4 people voted, including yourself, to be quite honest.
I voted to introduce the ordinance.
Okay, well, you voted to introduce it, but still in all. But again, so I don't think it should be the fact that we're not caring or we're not concerned. I mean, I'm concerned enough that I knocked the top floors off, which wasn't even in the motion. So please don't, paint us all with a broad brush on this. We all have different concerns. You have certain ones. We all have certain ones. We apparently felt that we spoke ours. So that's all. That's the only point I wanted to make to you. So please don't paint us with a broad brush.
So, still,
Yeah.
what I hear is there's no concern about the view angles to the historic train depot. The other issue that I'd brought up is that along the El Camino, there is in the PUD street facade articulation, all street-facing facades. And it goes on to talk about having, for every 25 feet of length, you have to have either a 2.5-foot recess or a 4-foot recess to break up the building. There's nothing of that nature, that condition for the east side. And so that's a concern I had, but nobody wanted to discuss it. Nobody seemed concerned. So I just want to know if, before we vote, if there's no discussion on that item, then fine. If there's really no, I don't understand the need to have a 42-foot height limit on buildings 7 and 8, but on the other buildings, with all due respect to the answer about the massing, I don't have, the problem I have with what I'm being told is that's, you can look at these drawings. No, I can't. I don't have any drawings in front of me because we knocked off a floor, and so I don't know what it looks like now. And when, like I said, I went to the back after the meeting, and some people from the east side came up to me right away and said, "What's the height?" I'm sorry, I can't tell you what the height is. I have no idea. I don't think any of us have any idea what that height is because we don't have anything in front of us showing us what the height is, like we did before when we had drawings with 4-story buildings. I mean, I appreciate the fact that we took off a whole floor on all the buildings, but give me a height. There is no height. I don't know. You seem to want to rush this thing along. Let's just take the vote. I'll just forget about all the things that I'm concerned about. We'll just vote, and I'll give you a negative vote. Okay, go, Mr. Mayor.
May I comment?
Well, let me comment one. First of all, the way this works is, at the end of the day, wherever we go, whether it takes 1 week, 1 year, or 100 years, we vote, okay? And sometimes you win, and sometimes you don't, okay? Sometimes you get what you want, and sometimes you don't. okay? So
Okay,
just
you-
because you bring up something
Yeah.
doesn't mean we all have to agree with you. Nor if we bring up something, do you have to agree with us, okay? So let's just get this squared away that nobody's rushing anything here, at least not
Oh, yes, they are.
your opinion. Okay.
Oh, yes, they are.
Ms.
Because,
Clappers. Just a second, Ms.
Yeah.
Clappers.
In the last 4.5 years, I have seen this project go through a variety of iterations, and it has continuously changed with input from the Planning Commission, from the council, from consultants, and from comments from members of the community. And we can continue to discuss it for another 10 years. I think we have a good project. There have been a lot of compromises that have been made to try to make this, as it was presented in the previous meeting, be a win-win that it can work for a variety of parties. And we have still yet to go through that design review phase, which, given the constraints that we've put on the size of the buildings, will bring some different appearance to the building. I think that a lot of these issues have been addressed. It's a planned development for the very purpose of being able to work within the constraints of this piece of property. And I think it's a project that, as it moves forward, will continue to add value to the community. And I think some of the comments that Councilmember Grocott made at the previous meeting regarding that the buildings were just a flat wall along the east side are incorrect and misinformation. So I would encourage you to really sit down and take a look at what those drawings entail and the discussions that came out of the Planning Commission that resulted in those buildings being articulated more on the east side than they are articulated on El Camino Real. The buildings are actually almost the reverse of what you would typically do. So hopefully as the final design is worked out by the developer, we will see a project that will continue to evolve into a greater addition to the community. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor? Here, I want to just, Mr. Collins next. Mr. Collins? Then we'll call you.
I apologize if my body language was a little impatient. This project has been going on for 9 years. I've heard the word rushed. I lost count. How do you rush a project when it takes 9 years? We've had 60-plus public meetings. We've had countless revisions. Every issue's been addressed over and over again. Many people, I've lost count of how many people have spoken. There's been a book of drawings, Mr. Grocott. We've had a video simulation. We've lowered the height. What does it matter if 3 stories is 38 feet or 39 feet or 40 feet? It's lower than 4 stories. I just don't see how this thing has been rushed. And like our mayor said, you have your opinion, we have ours. My opinion is that we've all addressed this for so long. Ms. Clapper was on the Planning Commission before she was on the council. She's seen this project through. You've been on for 12 years. You've seen the entire history of this. I've seen this project since I've been a part of the Chamber of Commerce and been involved and on EDAC and now on council. Mr. Grisilli's been on the council for 8 years. He's seen the project almost in its entirety. I give Mr. Obert a pass because for the last decade he was involved with school issues, but he's brought himself up to speed on it. So I understand maybe you're frustrated, but I really get the feeling that you don't want a project at all. You don't even want one story. We're not going to build a soccer field. Something's going to be built. A huge number of compromises have been made.
Mr. Obert?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of comments, but I actually first want to start with 2 questions, one of which I thought I knew the answer to, but then this dialogue back and forth has now confused me a little bit. To staff, have we set a maximum height on Building 8?
Yeah, I believe on Building 8 there is a maximum height.
42 feet.
42 feet, okay. That's what I thought. That was my recollection from the discussion at our last meeting. The other question I had is, and Mr. Maltby, I'll direct this to you, and you may bounce it to whoever's appropriate. It is inevitable in in the evolution of any project like this, or in fact, any project at all. I've had experience with this building my own private residence in San Carlos. There are adjustments that get made. And I think there were some examples given of that a few minutes ago of how those might play out. Is it possible for the dais to give staff direction as part of the approval that we wish the adjustments to be, for lack of a better term, relatively parsimonious? In other words, is there guidance that can be given there?
Well, I guess, yeah, guidance and, we talked about, as this goes through the design review process, bringing it back to council because of the high-profile nature so that you could, rather than just provide us with guidance, you can take a look and make those suggestions. In terms of, as it was stated earlier, in terms of minor modifications to what's been approved, introduced, those changes can occur. In terms of significant changes, that would not occur going forward. Tonight, with the second reading, you really don't have the ability to make much changes to what has been introduced without going back and reintroducing, if that's also part of your question.
You're also reminding me that this will be coming back for basically design approval. Mm-hmm. Because the one thing in the interchange I heard before, which would concern me significantly, as an example, would be filling in some of the courtyards. Even though I didn't vote for it, I view the council's approval as a project that sort of looks substantially kind of like what was in the drawings.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
And not some substantive change. The comment I just wanted to make is, I did vote against this last time for reasons that I explained before. I won't reiterate those here. To be consistent with what I did before, I'll be voting against this again. I do hope, though, that because we have some other, later on in this meeting, we will be launching yet another big project that'll go through various cycles of reviews. I do think that we ought to spend some time debriefing ourselves and, more importantly, when the next big project comes along, talking early on about how we want the process to work and what we want to see. Because with all due respect to my colleagues, and believe me, I don't at all for a moment deny that, and nor am I actually have any rancor about the fact that I could be on the short end of the stick and the majority can approve the project. But I just want to share with you, I too actually felt that the vote that we took, because it was late at night and I was taken aback by your proposal to slice off the fourth floor, I too felt that it was rather rushed. It's perfectly within the council's authority to do that. But to me, it isn't necessarily best practice. And Mr. Collins, the comment I would make is you're absolutely correct. I agree with you. We've had reviews and meetings of this ad nauseum to the point where I think any one of us could probably have repeated before any of the public speakers made their comments what they were going to say, which is no reflection on them. It's just the fact that we've had a lot of meetings. But the nature of this is that the project continues to evolve. And in fact, it went through some fairly substantive evolutions, I feel, at the tail end of our meeting last time. And so, in a sense, there is an argument to say, well, did we dot the I's and cross the T's on that particular iteration? No, I can make a pretty good case that we didn't. As I was quoted in the newspapers as saying when I told one of the reporters, yes, I do think that the council rushed on this one. I wasn't too upset about that because you were rushing in the direction which I wanted to go, which was to make the thing smaller. Okay, so but nonetheless, I do think that before we get into any other big projects, we ought to spend a little bit of time reflecting on this after the passions have cooled and the dust has settled, and more importantly, talk about what we want to see. How do we want the process to work for the next big project? Thanks,
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Just some comments in retort to what I heard. Number one, I do not want a soccer field, and I do not want it to be no development. I want to see a project there. I'm not thrilled about I've never been thrilled about putting housing between the El Camino and the railroad. I don't think that's good planning. If you were laying out a city from scratch, you would not put housing smack dab between a state highway and a railroad. You just wouldn't do it. But that said, I do want a project. I'm tired of looking at bare dirt. The comment about not being flat on the east side, I beg to differ. And excuse me, Ms. Clapper, I spent 16 hours going through those drawings. 16 hours that I could have been devoting to either my family or my business or a lot of other things. And I know how to read plans. I do it for a living. And a 2-foot recess, 2 or 3 foot recess, which is actually hard to tell because there's no graphic scale on the drawings. There's a lot of dimensions missing, understandably in some way because these are not construction drawings. But that said, a 2 or 3 foot recess on a building that's 300 foot long is going to look pretty flat, believe me. And what this lady told me was that the articulation, the 125 foot length of buildings that's allowed in the mixed-use station area can be overridden for articulation. Well, there is articulation on the El Camino side. It's not there on the east side, at least not to my satisfaction. There's no 4-foot relief for every 25 foot of length and so forth. There's just not. There's no courtyard delineation on that side of the building like there is on the El Camino side. Most of the animation that we saw, or whatever you want to call that, if you noticed, very little from the east side, a lot from the El Camino side. Why? Because it looks better from the El Camino side. It looks like what's across the street for the most part. But you know what it looks like on the east side? Same as that building on the east side. Not very interesting. So, and to Mr. Collins' comment that it's not been rushed, I'm sorry, Mr. Collins, but from my perspective as a council member, having it on the dais for 2 meetings, one which we ended at 10:30 for some reason, but the next one we could go till midnight and vote, that just didn't make sense to me. I understand. I think Mr. Olbert put it correctly. It's been through a lot. I understand that it's been through a lot. But parked here on this desk where I can comment on it and have a discussion on it and then vote on it, it was rushed. That's my opinion. So.
All right, thank you for your comments. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Clapper?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Obert?
No.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. Okay, moving on. Next item we have on the agenda is reports to council. These are updates on key city projects by city department heads, staff, and city council subcommittees. They're informational in nature, and no action will be taken on these items at this meeting. 9A is Samtrans Service Plan, San Carlos Alternative Service Pilot and Bus Rapid Transit Feasibility Study, verbal only.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. My name is Doug Kim, the Director of Planning at Samtrans, and just wanted to give you a heads up on 2 types of buses you're going to see coming to the community. We think both are upgrades. You're going to see the first in 2 months, and the second probably in about 2 years. So with that said, could we turn on the first presentation? Oh. To end show, okay. All righty. What I wanted to mention just up front is that both of these bus services we're going to talk about have actually nothing to do with the Transit Village, although the first does relate to what Councilmember Olbert had mentioned before about shuttle services in the city. How does this work? All righty. In January, in about 60 days, the first change we're going to make is to reduce service on Route 295, which many of you may know runs down the spine of the peninsula along Alameda, and as it hits the city of San Carlos, it moves over to the Caltrain station, runs on El Camino before it pops back out along Britain to Alameda again. We do provide hourly service right now. Frankly, a lot of people don't ride the bus except for school-age kids. We average about 1 or 2 riders on a 40-foot bus per hour, and we're not real keen on running big empty buses. So in January, we're going to be cutting back that service so that it stops as far south as the Caltrain station. And what we're going to be doing then is to introduce some new service in the city. And one of the commitments we had made to San Carlos and Pacifica was to try something different and stop running 40-foot buses that people weren't riding. So on January 26th, we're going to roll out local service that's going to do two things. First, in the mornings and the evenings, it's going to provide commuter service to and from the Caltrain station, and it's going to do a big loop that I'll show you in just a moment here. It's going to run on the hour, clockwise in the morning, counterclockwise in the afternoon, and what it'll do is it'll go by schools, it'll go by the Caltrain station and take folks to and from Caltrain to work or from work. We're going to run those for 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the evening. Now, in between those two times during the middle of the day, we're going to try something different. And we think it's going to appeal to what we've heard from a lot of your residents, which is, can you run a dial-a-ride service that will pick me up at my front door and take me where I want to go? So customers will be able to call us up to a day in advance and just say, can you pick me up at this point? We'll take them where they want to go within the city. And we're going to run that for about 5 hours during the middle of the day. And we've heard a lot of positive comments from some of your folks, especially up in the hills. So if that works, we can expand it. It is a pilot, and other cities are looking at how this can work in a city like San Carlos, and if it works, we'll do more of it. You can't really see this, but here's El Camino. Here's the Caltrain station. Here's San Carlos Avenue, winding all the way back to Alameda. So the service would make a big loop running down Alameda to Britain, heading over to San Carlos. It would hit the Caltrain station, make its way over to Holly, where it would then move up on Old County Road to Taylor, and then make a big loop along Industrial for heading back here onto Brewster. So it does run a little bit outside the city, but the whole intent is to help your residents and your businesses access each other by staying generally within the city of San Carlos. Here are the basics. It's going to start in pretty much 60 days from now. Adult fare will be $2 per trip, sort of a standard fare for our buses. It'll run pretty much from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. on the weekdays, once every hour. It does primarily serve San Carlos. It bleeds a little bit into North Redwood City. It will have a lift for wheelchairs, and it will, again, serve the west side of the Caltrain station, pretty much on El Camino. It's entirely funded by us. You guys don't pay a dime. This is generally what the buses will look like. So they're not the big 40-foot buses. They're 25-footers that are pretty user-friendly and are going to run on gasoline and can hold up to about 18 folks. We see it as a better option than running big 40-foot diesel buses. It'll be able to navigate within the city a little bit better and hopefully be a little more user-friendly for folks that don't want to take the bus today. So that's the first of two things I wanted to mention. We are working actively with your staff to try to get the word out about this service. We really want to try to hit some of the businesses along Industrial, try to appeal to some school kids that might be going to some of the local schools, see if we can pick up a few commuters going to and from the Caltrain station. So if there are no questions about that.
I have a question.
Okay.
You mentioned it would help folks in the hills, but you're only going on the Alameda?
No, I'm sorry. During the morning and afternoon rush hours, we're going to do that fixed route. But in between, during the midday, we'll go anywhere within the city.
Okay, thank you. I was confused on that. Thank you.
Sure.
Question, go ahead.
Actually, several questions. Have you been in touch with the local school district?
We have generally. Now, this is the caveat I'll mention. As you know, under federal law, we can't directly provide service to schools. Mm-hmm. So we're generally aware of when they run, when they have their bell times, but we can't directly serve them. So we serve the areas around them.
I guess the question I was going to ask is, from looking at your map, I don't think you're going to be serving some of the very heavily used areas of that, because you're no longer going to TL or Carlmont. It doesn't even look to me like you're going to Arundel.
Right, we are going near Sequoia. Carlmont is a tougher haul. Going up San Carlos is, frankly, there's nothing else up there that really would generate ridership aside from Carlmont, and we just can't directly serve schools in such an obvious way.
And despite the fact that you've been doing it for years.
I know in the past there had been service to Carlmont. we did look at that. We had to make some trade-offs. It's a long haul up there, way out of the way for us.
I would, it's your bus route to run. I would strongly encourage you in your outreach, and I would make this recommendation to staff as well. You better make sure that all of the parents in the San Carlos School District that are going to, in the San Carlos community who are going to be adversely affected by this change, understand what's happening. Because my understanding is there are quite a few of them. And there may also be an issue in terms of scheduling as well. Again, it's your route to run, but I think you may be generating an awful lot of heat from the decision.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. The staff provided very similar comments when we viewed the presentation and encouraged Samtrans to work with the district to the extent they can.
Will we be putting some information on our website about the changes to it?
We will, yes.
And alerting parents to research how it affects them? I think that'd be a good idea.
We'll be alerting residents, yeah.
Other questions?
Yes.
Mr. Grocott.
I have a question also has to do with the route. I suppose sounds like you're going to run this as a pilot program, and then you might look at, will you be doing any customer surveys or anything like that to get ideas of possibly adjusting this route? Maybe.
You bet, yeah. We're going to be doing a lot of outreach up front, and then we're going to be surveying folks on and off the bus to see whether we got it right or not.
Now, I suppose one of your concerns here, if you will, or one of the data inputs when you created your map was how long does it generally take to do that route? So as you make your adjustments per customer comments, you're probably going to try and keep that route distance time reference the same?
Yeah, I mean,
Somewhat the same?
We're trying to do a lot with this service, and we had to make some trade-offs. That circle, that route you saw, takes about 45 minutes on a bus, assuming some pickups and drop-offs. So it's not as fast as you would hope it would be, but yes. The one thing I'll say, just in response to Councilmember Olbert, is that we've also been talking with the city about its own opportunity to get separate funding for its own shuttle services that Samtrans is willing to pay for as well. So we're in conversation about that. It could serve Carlmont, it could serve other opportunities as well.
I'm well aware of that, having pushed that on more than one occasion. I was mostly reacting to the fact that this is going to be seen as a relatively sudden change since it's starting in January 1st.
Other questions? Okay, thank you.
He's got more.
I know he's got more. I know that part of it.
Right.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members, and guests in the audience. My name is Barrow Emerson. I'm a project manager at Samtrans, and specifically for the El Camino Real Bus Rapid Transit Phasing Study. I'm here tonight to tell you three things. Quick overview of the study, how it's going to progress, and how and when San Carlos can participate during and towards the end. By the way, I did make the same presentation to your Transportation Circulation Committee last week. Samtrans is attempting to do three things with this study: provide a better product for our existing customers, attract more riders with a more attractive, faster service, more convenient along El Camino, and thirdly, and possibly most important to a city, is we're doing this to support many of the planned growth programs along the El Camino corridor, like the Grand Boulevard Initiative. Bus Rapid Transit is a type of bus service and facility that attempts to provide a rail-like product in terms of speed and trip and vehicle and station amenity. Okay. Let's see if that'll go away. There we go. Very quickly, just some basic demographics about El Camino. I won't read them to you. But as you know, this last August, Samtrans introduced the ECR route that runs basically from Palo Alto all the way to Daly City, 7 days a week, 15-minute service all day, every day. A really good product. However, on the downside, it makes 100 stops. Now, that's great for connectivity of anyone wanting to go anywhere at any time. However, as you can imagine, it takes a while. It takes over an hour to go from Palo Alto to Millbrae and another 50-plus minutes to go from Millbrae to Daly City, a distance of 8 miles. Now, having said that, we've obviously provided a product which meets some needs because almost 13,000 people a day board it. That's a third of the system boardings for Samtrans. And for your curiosity, there's about 500 boardings a day, or 4% in San Carlos at the 7 stops we have here. If feasible, the goal is to introduce a higher quality bus service in the El Camino corridor, phased in over time, building on the recently introduced ECR service. Initial improvements in the next couple years could take the form of a rapid service with full BRT coming at a time when local conditions or opportunities warrant. This slide attempts to portray the assumption about what constitutes a rapid service and what constitutes a full BRT service and facilities. As you can see, the simplest feature of rapid is stopping less often. This is a service many of us who grew up with in bus-oriented cities know as limiteds. To reiterate, we see the introduction of a rapid service with the skip-stop service and possibly transit signal priority for transit as a real short-term goal in the next couple years, with full BRT occurring in the longer term if feasible or warranted. Whoops. Jumped ahead. Sorry about that. All right, I apologize for that. Anyway, as I mentioned during my introduction, the goal of introducing rapid or full BRT would be 3 things. Improve the experience for our current riders, increase ridership by offering a more attractive product, and to support planned growth with things like the Grand Boulevard Initiative. This slide also notes the Samtrans operating goals of providing a more cost-effective service, less stops, turning the buses around quicker, etc. And it also notes the goal of minimizing any traffic or parking impacts, which should be of particular interest to cities. In developing a service plan, we will take consideration of the above issues in the first set of bullets, and we'll look for opportunities to implement the features in the lower portion of the slide. Again, a rapid service could possibly only initially include the skip-stop service and traffic signal priority, and possibly vehicle and station branding. So, we are doing a number of city council presentations. We held public workshops in 2 locations last week. The opportunities for San Carlos to participate are through your staff's participation in CCAG and the Grand Boulevard Initiative. You will also have an opportunity, if we'd like, to come back to council in the springtime leading on to summer when we've come up with some relatively concrete proposals for the service and the stops. And we will be updating the Samtrans board in the late spring, early summer. Again, this is the way to contact us or to stay in touch with the projects, and I would be happy to answer any questions about the project for you.
Thank you. Questions? I had one quick one. When you say queue jumpers, what does that mean?
A queue jump is the idea of a way for the bus to get ahead of the congestion that it may or may not be in. The simplest form, I mean, that could be done in many ways. The most logical way that could be done in the El Camino corridor is you're aware that there are a number of right turn pockets for all automobiles up and down El Camino. In various places, including 2 places on El Camino already, the bus has permission to be in that right turn lane and continue forward. We are working with Caltrans on 5 more and may open the door to more of them.
Would one of those be in San Mateo at 2nd Avenue there?
I think that's one of the 2 that already exist.
So when I yelled at the bus guy for going straight, he could do that, okay. Fine. Just curious.
Actually, it's supposed to be a little sign there that says bus.
There may be one. I'm just curious because unless we have Deus Ex Machina lifting the buses, it's going to be tough to get by some of this traffic.
Exactly.
Okay. Other questions? Yes, Mr. Olbert. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. One question I had is you mentioned that the current route along El Camino in San Carlos, about 4% of the daily lifts are people getting in on or off in San Carlos?
Boardings, yes.
Boardings, excuse me. Am I correct in assuming that sounds like a relatively, compared to some other communities, smaller number?
It's probably related mostly to the number of stops. There are 7 stops in San Carlos. I'd suggest part of the other obvious part of that is I hate don't mean to touch on your previous discussion, but the east side of El Camino not having trip-generating things, but you do only have 7 stops in the approximate 3 miles of length.
What I'm getting at is, as you folks are evolving your scheduling and thinking along these lines, I would hope that you would not get to the point where you'd say, well, we don't really need to have any stops at all in this community, because that, we do have residents, and we hope to have more residents who are using the service, but they won't be able to do that if it's not there.
No, I appreciate that comment. It reminds me of something that when I go into more detail, I mentioned. As we're playing around with ideas for how many stops, we're talking right now in the 30 to 40 range. We have 3 criteria. The ones that currently have the most boardings. Secondly, those institutions or community attractors that, although they may not have a lot of boardings, they're obvious that you need to stop there. And the third, to address your comment, is we don't just want to leave 3 and 4 mile gaps. So coverage is part of one of our criteria. So there will be stops in there that will possibly not have massive boardings, but will create a space between stops that takes into account your concern.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate it. And we'll look forward to seeing how it all works out. Thank you. The next item we have is 9B, which is an update on condition of PG&E Natural Gas Line 147.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Council members. Tonight, I'll just, because there was recent activity at the CPUC this past week, I'm providing the report. So last week on Monday the 18th and Wednesday the 20th, there were 2 all-day hearings at the CPUC concerning Line 147. You might recall that the Commissioner, ALJ Bushy,
ALJ, could you?
Administrative Law Judge Bushy at the CPUC on October 21st had set an expedited schedule for the review of the safety of Line 147 in San Carlos. Unfortunately, just before the hearing, we were provided by PG&E through their counsel voluminous materials and the reports from the CPUC, which included sworn testimony of the PG&E engineers, data responses, and other information. The City and County of San Francisco and other parties who are parties to the proceeding requested a 2-day continuance based on the fact that we had only had 1 business day to review this information. That was not granted, and you might recall that the City of San Carlos early on, way back in October, we asked for enough time to have our expert, Dr. Stevick, provide additional information that was relevant to the safety of the pipeline, and that request was also denied. So the hearings went forward on Monday and Wednesday, and what was presented in the 13th and 14th included testimony from the CPUC advisory staff, which indicated, in their opinion, that Line 147 could be operated at 330 psi, which was the same pressure before the Superior Court judge ordered the pipe shut down in early October. Our expert, because of the lack of complete information and metallurgical testing, is saying the most the pipeline could be operated at under these circumstances with the unknown pipe was 220 psi. The Office of Ratepayer Advocates agrees that 220 is the appropriate pressure based upon a federal standard concerning, and I'm getting into technical details here, but based upon a technical standard involving pre-1970 installed pipe and later pipe. They and we believe that the standard for pre-1970 pipe should lead to a conclusion that 220 psi would be the maximum operating pressure for the pipeline. Right now where we stand is Judge Bushy will be issuing a proposed decision. We're not exactly sure when she will issue it. On the original schedule, she was going to issue that decision on Friday, but because the hearings were continued, we don't know exactly when she'll issue her proposed decision. We will have some time to comment on that proposed decision before it becomes final. Once her decision is issued and becomes final, then it goes to the California Public Utilities Commission, the CPUC, for review, at which point in time we would have another opportunity to present our case on the matter. The CPUC hearing originally was scheduled to be on December 5th. That timeline is in doubt because of the amount of information and the fact that the testimony went on until through Wednesday. The next available CPUC meeting would be December 19th, and that's the time that we would anticipate that the matter would be heard. On a related matter, Judge Bushy will be on December 2nd on a matter that's related to the OSC regarding the records.
OSC, I'm sorry.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor. Order to show cause.
Thank you.
That's an order that is issued by a judge to say it was issued to PG&E to show why they should not be sanctioned for the record keeping and other issues that were raised in that proceeding. And that was in the press recently that the proposed fine that Judge Bushy proposed for PG&E was $6,750,000, and then a commissioner later issued a revised recommended fine to PG&E for the same issues of upwards of $17 million. So on December 2nd, that's going to be considered. I plan on attending that.
Questions for Mr. Rubens? Mr. Olbert?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Rubens, and I don't mean this to be a too open-ended question, but just in general, from you having sat through those hearings, one of my concerns all along in this has been that the timing is such that I didn't see how new information was going to be able to be brought to bear on the decision. I mean, obviously, there's been no, as far as I know, subsequent metallurgical testing. The line hasn't been pigged. Nobody's been digging up sections of the line, I don't think, to physically examine it. To your recollection, what if anything, new was presented?
Well, what was new that we didn't have before was the exact direct testimony. And it's not, I have to step back a little. At this level, the direct testimony that you would have in a superior court trial where the attorney presents the witness and the witness is asked questions doesn't happen at this level. What happens is all the documents, including the documents that we received at the last minute, get presented as direct testimony. So there were sworn statements that were presented as direct testimony, and then witnesses were called to be cross-examined. And so the only new information, and it was only new because I didn't have it. The testimony was taken in late October, and it wasn't delivered until November 13th or 14th. So I didn't see it until 2 weeks, and basically one business day before the 18th hearing. So new information, I think it's still being evaluated, frankly, because I haven't had a chance to look through, and nor has our special counsel looked through all that information that was presented at the last minute.
Oh, I see. And that same information, because it was submitted to the court, it could be factoring into Judge Bushy's deliberations.
That's correct.
The other question I had is, whenever this matter does come up before the PUC, either the 5th or the 19th or what have you, do you recommend that members of the council be there, or recommend that we not be there?
I think I will defer that at this time, because I don't think there will be a lot of time to present testimony, but I think council, it's a public hearing, and so the council, as members of the public, could attend. It just can't be a meeting because it'll be outside our jurisdiction.
Of course, right. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rubens. All right, move on to item 10A, new business. Consideration of introducing an ordinance to adopt the 2012 edition of the International Fire Code with the 2013 California Fire Code amendments, and to consider introducing an ordinance to amend and modify Chapter 15.04 of the City of San Carlos Municipal Code, Technical Building Codes, to adopt the 2013 California Building Code, Series 2012 edition of the International Property Maintenance Code and the Safety Assessment Program, SAP placards. Period. That's a long sentence, Mr. Valley.
Go right to the, good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of council, Chris Valley, building official. The California building codes are updated every 3 years, and the new 2013 California Building Code series becomes effective January 1st, 2014. Local jurisdictions may amend the code to address local climatic, geological, topographical, and environmental conditions, as long as those amendments are not less restrictive than state code. The amendments proposed for San Carlos do not vary much from the prior code series and are in keeping with the approach by neighboring agencies as well. Overall, the intent is for unified consistency with minimal amendments to the state codes. There's a few key items I'd like to touch on tonight. One is the 2013 Cal Green versus the City of San Carlos Green Building Ordinance. Local agencies with green building ordinances will be challenged to keep pace with the progress the state is making in the world of green building and energy use. Cal Green, the state's green building code, under the 2013 code, includes new construction and now residential additions and alterations of any size that increase the building's conditioned floor area. It is estimated also that the new energy code is or will be 25% more stringent than previous standards for residential development and 30% more stringent for commercial development. A significant change also in the energy code is that duct sealing and testing will be mandatory now for all new residential construction, residential additions, furnace replacements, new HVAC in existing residences, and addition of AC units as well. Added cost to the homeowner for these permits is expected to be $350 to $750 and upwards of $1,000 for larger residences. I shouldn't say that's a fee that we'll be collecting, it's a fee that the homeowner will be paying for the duct testing. Language of the San Carlos Green Building Ordinance still includes the Green Point and LEED standards for various construction projects. Yet, we'll need to see how the 2013 codes work with the Green Point and LEED requirements. It should be noted also that a few agencies are considering sunsetting their green building ordinances and simply going with the state mandated code for green building and energy. Currently, staff is recommending a wait and see period for at least 6 months, then return to council with more information. But if the question is, are we losing anything? The answer is no, we are not losing anything with the more robust state codes. Another item is SB 407. Main emphasis is reducing our water use. It's a new water use efficiency bill. Requires residential buildings built prior to January 1st, 94, undergoing permitted alterations, additions, or improvements to replace non-compliant plumbing fixtures with water-conserving water fixtures. It should be noted that this Senate bill is also included as language in Cal Green. Also, passed way back in 2007, AB 715 becomes effective January 1st, and that prohibits the sale of toilets exceeding 1.28 gallons per flush and urinals 0.5 gallons per flush. California accessibility and ADA is a little more in alignment now. Approximately 90% of the code language discrepancies have been cleaned up. Further cleanup of federal and state accessibility codes can be expected in future code series. The 2012 International Fire Code and 2013 California Fire Code include amendments that were included in previous ordinance of the San Carlos Fire Department. The proposed ordinance reflects practical enforcement of the code, aligns San Carlos and Redwood City with our current shared services agreement, and will not pose an unreasonable hardship with development in San Carlos. The safety assessment program involves the use of green, yellow, and red placards, or tags, as we call them. The placards are used to label a structure's condition in post-disaster events and are very useful in code enforcement where a structure is deemed uninhabitable for whatever reason. Formal adoption of the program is recommended as it enables city staff to enforce the posting if necessary to better ensure life safety for the community. I should note that 4 inspectors, including myself, are certified in the program. Lastly, staff is recommending adoption of the 2012 International Property Maintenance Code to replace the outdated 97 editions of the Uniform Housing Code and Uniform Code for the Abatement of Dangerous Buildings. The new Property Maintenance Code is a modern, up-to-date code to govern the maintenance of existing buildings and is utilized by the County of San Mateo, of which we have a shared services agreement for code enforcement. I can answer any questions you have at this moment.
Okay. Questions for Mr. Valley? Mr. Olbert?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Valley. Just a couple of questions. One is, I want to make sure I understand if the new state rules have basically, I'm speaking somewhat loosely here, required, or relative to what they were before, they required 25% more energy efficiency in new construction. I'm thinking residential. Right? Does our code of requiring that applicants go 15% beyond mean that now it's 15% on top of the 25%? Or did the 25 supersede the 15?
The language in our green building ordinance pertaining to the 15% above energy has been removed.
Because it was not compliant with the state, state mandate.
It's actually less restrictive than current or than soon-to-be mandated state code.
So it's not additive or multiplicative, it just was replaced?
It was, we were given direction by the Energy Commission to, well, we were told by the Energy Commission that our ordinance, the energy component of our ordinance would be unenforceable. And so I tried to get a pre-review of the current language of the ordinance by the CEC, the Energy Commission, but apparently they're quite busy, and I did not hear back.
Okay. Second question was the process by which we, and this was part of our code, which may also have been superseded, that's what I'm trying to understand, is we established that you had to hire a Greenpoint rater to basically go through and validate the efficiencies that you had in your application. How does that exist under this new set of rules, or is that gone too?
That's kind of part of the wait and see that we're trying to find out how Greenpoints will dovetail with the new code. We'll still be working with or working with more third-party individuals, raters, whomever, with the green building. That's kind of coming down the chute a little more. ICC's providing certification courses for green building and so forth that will more than honor out in the field as a third party. Currently, we still have the language of that includes the rater requirement, but we need to still see how that again works with the new codes.
I understand what you're saying, but I guess what concerns me is, does that mean that while we're taking sort of a wait and see approach, or watch and see how things evolve, we have people who are going to be required to hire Greenpoint raters, even though we're not necessarily sure in the future that they would be required to do that? I just am concerned about project applicants spending money when they don't necessarily have to, and in fact, maybe when the state doesn't want you to, in effect.
The other consideration I was going to bring to council was a complete elimination of the ordinance itself and go with just straight state code. But we wanted to honor prior interest in the Greenpoints. This ordinance just a year ago went through council re-review and such, and included the Greenpoints, and so it was with that we left it in. Again, staff needs to do a little more research and find out where we are with how the new codes dovetail with Greenpoints. I have to admit, I don't have an answer for you on that right now. In fact, for instance, the I would say a beta version of the checklist. They haven't quite released it, is my understanding. And the same is true for the energy calcs for energy consultants. Those also are in a beta version.
I guess I'll hold that next comment for when we have discussion on the dais. One last question that just occurred to me for Mr. Rubens. Mr. Rubens, since I am a homeowner and am in the process of building a new home and might, in fact, under the current rules, would have to hire a Greenpoint rater, do I need to recuse myself from this discussion and vote?
I don't believe you do, because the current law is the current law. And I guess what you're saying is, that could this have an impact on your project? I'd have to know more information about where you are in your project. Because you pulled your building permits, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the trigger where the rules apply to you for that.
Well, except in the context of the Greenpoint rater. And in fact, for example, if I were to propose that, who knows if the council would accept this, if I were to propose that we adopt what staff is suggesting and recommending with the caveat that we stop requiring Greenpoint certification until such time as we figure out whether it still plays nicely together, that's actually going to benefit me personally, because I haven't yet had to hire that person.
Well, I don't, the ordinance won't be effective until into January in the first place. So it's not going to, because it still has to be, we still have to bring it back at another meeting, and then it couldn't be effective until early January. And then secondly, since you've pulled your building permit, that's the trigger point of the effective rules that apply to your property.
I see. Okay, fair enough.
Subject to the current ordinance.
That answers the question. Thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Valley, just a couple. This may sound a little bit odd, but how does the state arrive at toilet flushing standards? I'm sorry.
You don't want to know.
I mean, why not say a gallon?
Don't give them any ideas, Ron.
Sorry.
The code addresses, to me, the big changes in the code is addressing water and energy use. And so I think there's a fair amount of dialogue with manufacturers and so forth, and how much little water you can use to do the job, so to speak. And I'm just going to leave it at that. I really don't have anything else to add on how they come up with those numbers, other than they shoot for 20% lesser water use. And so that definitely has an effect on the per gallon flush rate and so forth.
And just to add to the answer there, a lot of these standards are driven by the industries that sell these products. We're striving to create a product that uses less water, and then to have laws passed that would require homeowners who are doing projects to go out and purchase their products.
So once again, regulation follows innovation.
Right.
That's what I thought. The other part I wasn't clear on, it said that you had to upgrade the plumbing fixtures upon a sale of a home starting in January of 2017. It didn't say who pays for that. Is that left up to the homeowner and the seller and the buyer?
Yes, that's between the two parties.
Okay. And then the last question was about the ADA standards. I didn't see any specifics on that. Do they still just affect public buildings?
Commercial, public, yes. Yeah, we're not talking privately owned residential, no.
Okay.
Yeah. But what's nice about that second I mentioned was that we now have less confusion out in the field of federal standards versus state. They're a little more in line with each other.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I had one quick question on the installation of water use efficiency. You indicated that if there was a improvement or you came in to improve your house, if I came in to improve my front window, do I have to put in water efficiency?
No, you don't.
Okay, so it's just a matter if it's a plumbing improvement.
It's actually defined as more of a home improvement type permit, bathroom remodel, kitchen remodel, addition.
Well, if there's water somewhere in the improvement, somewhere if there's water in the improvement.
That would be a good way to look at it, yes.
So if I'm improving my kitchen, do I have to put a no flow or a low flow in my shower?
The permit will be conditioned to include the upgrade of those fixtures, yes.
So the entire house. So if
Assuming your house is built before January 1st, 1994.
Right, so again, I'm just trying to understand. So if someone comes in and they're going to do improvement in an area that has water, they're going to have to improve they're going to have to do the energy efficiency for all the water things in their whole house.
That is the intended language of that law and how other agencies will be enforcing it as well.
Including toilets?
Including what?
Including toilets?
Yes.
Okay, so if I'm going to do my kitchen,
Yep.
it's going to be required that I improve my shower, my toilets in the entire house, even though the improvement never touches those.
There'll be a big red stamp on your plans that state you
Okay,
are
I'm just
responsible
trying to
do
understand
that.
so that, like with people that are building their house or people that are going to be improvements, that's a big, to me, that's one of the bigger items here.
This is a very far-reaching
yeah.
law right now, and I'm not sure how much outreach went out on behalf of the folks at Sacramento.
Okay.
So here we are now.
Understand. I'm just trying to understand and if other folks understand it too.
Exactly.
All right. No more questions? Is there anyone in the public wishing to speak on this item? Okay, thank you, Mr. Valley. Maybe some other stuff come up. So here we are. Want to make a motion and we can discuss it? Or not?
Well, I'll make the motion, unless you want
Go ahead, I was going to make an amendment, I suspect, but go ahead.
to. All right, you want me to make it and you make the amendment?
Sure.
Okay.
I was just going to say, there's two motions, so it depends on which one you're talking about
True.
amending.
All right. So
Two ordinances?
So the first one, ordinance number
1469.
1469, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Carlos amending the San Carlos Municipal Code, Chapter 15.04, Section 15.04.110, Technical Building Codes by adopting the 2012 edition of the International Fire Code with the 2013 California Fire Code amendments, including all adopted standards as specified, prescribing regulations governing conditions hazardous to life and property from fire, hazardous materials, or explosion, and for providing the fire safety inspection process for the hazardous uses of or operations, and establishing a Bureau of Fire Prevention, San Carlos Fire Ordinance.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Discussion? Or perhaps amendment?
Actually, my amendment's on the next ordinance.
Okay. Discussion on this ordinance? Okay, hearing none, roll call, please.
Councilmember Clapper?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. Okay. Another motion?
All right. I'm on a roll. Ordinance number 1470.
70.
Ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Carlos amending the San Carlos Municipal Code, Chapter 15.04, Technical Building Codes by adopting the 2013 editions of the California Administrative Code, California Building Code Volumes 1 and 2, California Residential Code, California Electrical Code, California Mechanical Code, California Plumbing Code, California Energy Code, California Historical Code, California Existing Building Code, California Green Building Standards Code, California Referenced Standards Codes, 1997 Uniform Security Code, the 2012 edition of the International Property Maintenance Code with amendments and modifications, and Safety Assessment Program, SAP placards.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Discussion or amendment? Mr. Olbert?
Yes, I'd like to know if Mr. Collins would accept a friendly amendment that until such time as staff can determine how our existing Greenpoint rating requirement coexists with these new set of rules, that we temporarily suspend that requirement.
I accept that.
Assuming we can do that.
I think that we haven't, I don't think we've agendized that change or that particular item tonight, the proposed suspension of that part of the code, so.
Is it not part of the building code?
Well, what we're considering tonight is adopting the current Uniform Building Code sections, and if I'm understanding what you're attempting to do, it's the part of the Green Building Ordinance that deals with the rating system. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
That's not on the agenda. That part's not on the agenda. Changing that part of the code.
I bow to your expertise. I withdraw my amendment, but I would ask that the staff bring back that at the earliest convenience.
I have a question on that then. Do we have to wait for earliest convenience, or can we just have it request that staff bring it back at our next meeting?
Yeah, because I'm thinking back to the discussion we had when we most recently updated the city's own green building code. And I thought one of the subjects of our discussion was the fact that in this coming January, the state was going to be changing things, and that was very likely that everything we were putting in place, or a good portion of what we were putting in place previously, we were going to let go of because the state's requirements were going to be more restrictive. So I'm a little bit confused about why they're not linked together, and I like some of the ideas I'm hearing about how we can take a look at this in fairly short order.
I would have no objection to tasking staff with bringing this back at our next meeting, assuming staff thinks they can do that.
I think based on the discussion we had earlier and the comments of the city council, I don't think we'll have an answer to the bigger Green Points question by then, but certainly I can put on the consent calendar an item just suggesting that we suspend the program until such time that we do.
Fine.
Okay.
That works for me.
Everyone, we'll bring it back for discussion. If someone wants to pull it off consent, then they can do that. Okay? All right, thank you. So the amendment's removed, so the motion's on the floor. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Councilmember Clapper?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. All right. 10B, consideration of eliminating northbound left turn lane at El Camino Real and Holly Street to allow for widened sidewalk and enhanced pedestrian connectivity and safety on El Camino Real. Mr. Walter.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Jay Walter, Public Works Director, and tonight we're bringing back for some discussion and consideration the elimination of the northbound left turn lane from El Camino Real to Holly, which presumably will allow for a wider sidewalk on the southeast corner of El Camino and Holly as part of the Transit Village project that had been discussed at the last meeting. So what I did for you tonight was I prepared just some graphics that we can use for discussion purposes to get started, and then I will attempt to answer questions you may have about this proposal, and Community Development Director Al Savay is here as well, just in case something comes up as maybe it's more closely related to the Transit Village project itself. But as you can see on the screen, in this image we have Holly Street that kind of crosses the diagonal here, and then El Camino Real in this position here. And as you can see, we currently have a left turn lane from northbound El Camino onto Holly. We have 2 through lanes for northbound El Camino, and we have 2 right turn lanes which serve to take traffic from El Camino onto Holly heading towards the freeway. That's the current configuration that we have right now. One of the things to note is that as I've put this red line on the screen, essentially what you see in alignment here is the left turn for southbound El Camino approximately lines up with the left turn for northbound El Camino. That's a pretty typical practice at signalized intersections where you have that opposing lane that turns lined up directly opposite each other. Outside of that, you have your 2 through lanes which continue on past the intersection in both directions. That's the typical configuration that you'll see at signalized intersections to try to line up those approaches. What we have on Holly Street is just a little bit different. We have the left turn lane for westbound Holly to southbound El Camino here. And on the opposite side, we have actually a shared lane, which is a left turn lane to northbound El Camino, as well as a through lane onto Holly Street going across the intersection. This creates a slightly skewed angle for vehicles to travel, and so as they will proceed on Holly Street across the intersection, they have to move to their right in order to get into the lane that is heading towards the freeway. So it's not exactly lined up like the one on El Camino is, and so motorists have to know, actually, motorists in both of those lanes, they have to know that as they cross the intersection, they have to move to the right in order not to collide with the left-turning vehicle or the nose in the median there. So looking at the lane configuration as it was discussed at the last council meeting for the Transit Village, what was proposed potentially would be to move over, to eliminate the left turn move northbound Holly and move 2 through lanes over, shift them over to the left, and then maintain 2 right turning lanes from El Camino onto Holly. The traffic volumes for this northbound move are, for the through movement and the right turn movement, are by far the dominant movement. I have some numbers on those for the morning and afternoon peak hours, just for discussion purposes. But for the sake of this, we've used the idea that we would simply shift over those movements so that the through movement could take advantage of the space that the left turn lane occupies now. The black line on the screen denotes where the new curb line would be for the Transit Village project as currently proposed. So there is essentially the loss of 1 lane width in that area, and that's to accommodate wider sidewalk across the frontage of the Transit Village project. And wider sidewalk, street trees, the other amenities that were that are being planned. But the building footprint, which I did not have information on, I'm not exactly sure how close that gets to the edge, or where that edge of curb is. And then on the other side, I've simply just shown the same, the dual left turn lanes onto Holly and the through movements for southbound El Camino Real. So one of the potential problems with simply shifting the lanes over is that we end up with these 2 lanes for northbound having to make a decided shift of at least 12 feet to the left in order to continue their movement northbound. It's not completely without precedent, as that this intersection does already have a skewed movement on Holly Street. But we would need to work with Caltrans to get the approval of this offset, as we call it. And we may want to consider some modification of this median island on the northern leg of El Camino in order to make this a little bit less than the 12-foot that I'm expecting to have it move. Caltrans is generally a bit more sticky about those types of things, so we would definitely have to work with them on this. But in my estimation, this would be a very, very valuable move in that we would be able to continue to accommodate the high volumes of traffic that are on northbound El Camino at this location. The original proposal with only 1 lane and elimination of the left turn lane, that may have created some difficulties for us as far as that right turn move backing up at peak times. So at this point, that's, at least as I see it, an acceptable strategy in this location would be to shift that traffic into the space that currently has the left turn lane for northbound in order to accommodate that through move. But we would have to work with Caltrans to get essentially to get the approval for that. And I think that would be a good way to solve that problem on this particular project as we move the Transit Village project ahead. One last note on this. At this location, I also would recommend that the pedestrian crossing at this corner be removed. And the reason for that is because of this very busy move, right turn move, and the very nearly adjacent crossing on the other side of Holly Street, as well as up at the train station location, we are adding another crosswalk from San Carlos Avenue over to the train station. So my sense is that this pedestrian move would not be adversely affected if we eliminated it at this particular location, and I think it would help with signal operations in that regard. So you can take questions if you have them at this point.
Okay. Questions? Mr. Olbert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Walter. I'll ask you the question, but I suspect this may be a Mr. Savay question. Hypothetically, what do we lose if we allow the sidewalk near that intersection to be narrower, and in other words, so that we don't need to lose a lane. I know that there was some concern that Legacy had expressed after the last meeting that if we kept the setback rules and whatnot and didn't move the lane, then we'd truncate the size of the building. I'm actually asking a different question, which is, what happens if we just allow the sidewalk to be narrower?
That's a good question. I don't know if you could, I guess you could get the narrow sidewalk in there. You may lose street trees. There's 4 street trees in that location. And I think that it would be awfully close then to the building, that the sidewalk would then be much closer, it seems like to me, to the building. So you'd get that sort of a more abrupt building edge right at the pedestrian level there, and probably a lot less landscaping in front of the building as well.
So you'd lose a lot of the aesthetic softening setback kind of thing that we currently have.
Right. And one of the other things, you could always move the building in to accommodate a wider sidewalk and still get your trees. But you'd, have a significant effect on the building, excuse me.
Right. And I can understand Legacy's concern about that. I'm just, frankly, the reason I'm asking the question is before Mr. Walter put up this last slide with the 2 green arrows showing the 12-foot shift to the side, that looks like, it looks like a fairly significant shift. I could see that posing some increased risk of traffic problems, collisions, whatnot.
It typically, it can present that problem, but because we have that same thing in this intersection on the other approach, I don't think it would be entirely unusual. So that's why I say I think we can work to try to kind of squeeze this in a little bit. We can take a little bit from maybe a couple of the other lanes in order to minimize that as much as possible. But I believe because we have that type of an offset already for going under the train tracks, I think that this will not be a big surprise to traffic here.
All right, fair enough. Thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Collins?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple. You mentioned something about there's somewhat of a precedent for other intersections to have such a shift. Are there any close to us other than our town?
Excuse me,
I'm just trying to
Councilmember Collins, I didn't particularly think about that, especially along El Camino, to try to come up with some examples. I probably should have done that. But it isn't, it's not without precedent, and that's just based on my experience in the area with Caltrans, with other cities and things like that.
And just following up on Mr. Olbert's question, does Caltrans have a standard that they use for, the amount of shift that's allowable at an intersection?
They would essentially, the standard would be that your lanes would align so that there would be no offset. And there would have to be then a negotiation with Caltrans for what's called a design exception for the offset to be allowed. And that would be essentially in the permit with Caltrans to approve the work.
That's all.
Other questions? Is there anyone from, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes. So my understanding is that just above the top of what's showing on the map there for the proposed plan for the transit village will be an area for the Samtrans buses to pull over alongside the sidewalk.
Actually, that's been relocated. The transit stops are inside the parking lot. If I remember
They're
right,
all inside the parking lot?
We've eliminated the on-street stop past San Carlos Avenue.
Is that was not my understanding from the
South
last time I
crosswalk,
looked
yeah.
at the drawings, but is that something that has changed in the last 3 weeks?
One there and one here.
It's not changed in the last 3 weeks to my knowledge, but as I understood it, we had moved that stop back into the parking lot for the transit village.
My recollection is there will be a stop in front of Building 5 and 6. So in that location, there will still be that on-street stop there.
Okay.
Yeah. And in the transit center as well.
Right. That's my understanding was they were going to have spaces for buses in both locations, depending on what the length of time is that the bus is waiting.
Yes.
For them to start up their route. So, okay. So and that's not an issue with Samtrans with having that bus location and reducing one of the lanes and.
No, yeah, it was okay, it still fit. And they put those stops in with consideration of this narrowing.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, I just wanted to make sure
Yeah,
I
it's
was
further back.
clear on how that's
Yeah.
going to work. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this item? Okay, if not, I'll entertain a motion.
Actually, is there a motion or a resolution? I didn't see one.
Well, it's just to approve. I'm not sure what the motion might be. Mr. Rubens might
This is
explain it to us.
to approve the plan for the elimination of that left turn lane northbound El Camino.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve staff's recommendation to eliminate that left turn northbound lane at the Holly El Camino Real intersection.
And also the enhanced pedestrian connectivity and safety, because you're basically also going to eliminate the crosswalk. Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Discussion?
I just want to, for the record, Mr. Olbert mentioned about, this shift, and I think Mr. Collins asked if there's any place else that it happens. I can tell you it happens also when you're crossing Industrial Road on Holly Street going towards Redwood Shores. And I can also tell you that one evening I was in the left lane to go across. It was raining, it was dark, and I've driven, and mind you, I've driven that intersection hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. And I went across the intersection, and I ended up in the oncoming lane, and quickly realized it and switched over. That's the kind of situation we're creating here. So I'm not going to be able to vote for this because I think instead of taking something and improving it, we're taking something and making it worse. Mr. Walters is right. We've got that condition on Holly crossing over. And I can't tell you how many times I've been driving across this intersection in one lane or the other, and the car to the right, actually, most times when I enter this intersection and approach it, going towards 101, I'm in that most left lane. And I can tell you how many times the person in the right lane is trying to drive straight across the intersection and has nearly sideswiped my car. We also have trouble with this intersection because people we've got coming from the east, headed west, turning onto the El Camino so often with the two lanes turning to go south on El Camino, people just switch lanes right in the middle of the intersection and don't think about it. So we've already got, in my mind, a fairly unsafe situation here, and all we would be doing by eliminating this lane is compounding it and making it worse. So there's no way I can support this recommendation.
Okay, Mr. Olbert? Mr. Olbert?
I was just going to ask, actually, since I was the one who made the motion, can I actually propose amending my motion? Or do I have to withdraw it?
Yeah, the second has to agree. That's our process.
I see.
I don't have a problem.
Well, why don't you wait to hear what I have?
Listening to the
Unless you want to hand me a blank check.
Listening to the yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, what I was thinking is directing staff to see whether or not there could be some kind of compromise solution involved where the sidewalk is narrowed somewhat and the left turn lane is eliminated, but we effectively reduce the amount of shift that needs to take place. I think the geometry works that way if we're willing to make the trade-offs.
And I believe we're going to end up having to do that anyway. I don't believe we're going to be able to get an approval for a 12-foot offset from Caltrans. So I think we're going to have to look at minimizing it to a degree.
Well, that's my amendment, that we would direct staff to work to minimize that by looking at compromising on the width of the sidewalk.
Okay, the seconder?
Yes,
agree?
second.
Okay. All right, further discussion?
I completely agree with Councilmember Grocott about that intersection. I've had the same problem myself numerous times, even going straight through from the east to the west. People who are in the left turn lane all of a sudden decide to go straight through. There's so many mixed messages that I would hope to see that in the course of redoing this intersection, that there be some additional markings within the intersection itself to guide automobiles.
That was going to be my question.
Yeah, I think we really have to provide that level of direction because I think something is bound to happen. I think we're just really, really lucky that it hasn't happened to this point, because there is, I've seen other intersections that are much more clearly delineated, and this one is so vague, I'm really surprised we haven't had more problems. So I would want to see that, have that understanding that that would be a condition that we would not only improving pedestrian safety, but more clearly articulating how automobiles should be moving through the intersection.
I would agree, and anecdotally, I don't know, Mr. Grocott, well, I guess most of us were here. I don't know who was and wasn't when they put the grade separation in. When they first put the grade separation in, I remember, when you were coming toward the El Camino from the 101 on Holly, they had a goofy left-hand turn lane to go onto the El Camino, and that was the goofiest thing ever designed by man. There was almost an accident, I think, every 10 seconds. And that was one of those things where, and finally somebody got the bright idea to fix that one, and they did fix it, and so now it's a lot more delineated. But I agree with the comments that were made, that's this intersection, especially in the morning, and that's why I wanted to make sure there were 2 lanes, going to the right. It's busy. And so I think we just have to, and also the fact that people just need to pay attention to what they're doing. But a lot of people don't. So maybe buttons or whatever needs to be done to maybe the buttons are a good idea to have it come across, and then that, purposely lit so that they can see what they're doing. But anyway, I think you've got the thing of the.
Is there going to be any change in the signage, overhead signage, in terms of identifying what lanes are supposed to be going straight and which ones are supposed to be turning?
We can certainly take a look at that. And then if something would be appropriate with the project improvement, then we'll go ahead and implement it.
I think this would be a great intersection to look at that, because so often you can't see the arrows on the road because there's so many cars. You're guessing, am I in the straight-through lane or am I in the turn lane? And so I would love to see it more clearly identified for drivers.
Won't Caltrans have something to do with the signage?
Oh, yeah.
Anything that's within that El Camino right of way.
I would think that they probably have some design that they're intending on putting up.
Well, since we don't have anything right now that helps us with this situation, I would not want to leave it up to Caltrans to see what needs to be done.
They get to the final call.
Yeah,
right, but if we don't make the request, then they're not going to.
I think Mr. Walter has a pretty good idea of what we're talking about.
He knows what
here.
we want.
The whole intersection needs to be looked at completely, and anything that we can do, as Mr. Grocott said, to make it safer, I think we need to do, especially if we're going to change lanes around. So,
Direction received.
okay. Call the question. Let's have the roll call, please.
Councilmember Clapper?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Walter. Moving on to item 10C, consideration of resolutions approving purchase and sale agreements for 595 Industrial Road, 810 East San Carlos Avenue, and 850 East San Carlos Avenue. Mr. Savay.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. What I'd like to do first is orient you to the site a little bit. This is what we call the landmark site. There's actually 2 landmark sites here at the intersection of Industrial Road and Holly Street. And the one we're discussing tonight is over here, and it's actually 5 parcels that are put together. It's this parcel at the corner where Bayshore Electric is, 551, which was recently purchased by Baker's Union. And then here are the 3 that we're discussing this evening: 595 Industrial, 850 San Carlos Avenue, and 810 East San Carlos Avenue. So these, and then this is the other landmark site here where we have a self-storage place in In-N-Out Burger right across there. And of course the highway, the 101 highway, the Bayshore Highway here, and here's the southbound on-ramp. So for more than 2 decades, this industrial at Holly Street intersection and these parcels have been considered a prime location for regional serving, commercial, and hospitality uses, which would contribute to the city's financial viability and implement the city's economic development plan. Shortly after the council enacted the landmark zoning recently, back in May, staff was approached by owners and interested buyers of the property and of these
3 properties that you see here in red. So these are, again, the 3 properties that we're discussing for city acquisition tonight. Although the 3 properties are under separate ownership, all the property owners at this time are willing to sell. They want to sell the property. And this hasn't happened for many, many years, decades. The owners are represented by a single real estate broker, and this person was also brought forward several interested developers, including hotel developers seeking to develop the site and obtaining entitlements for the site. So why should the city purchase the land in the first place? Hotel development on this 3.91 acre site has long been sought by the city as a means to increase and diversify our recurring general fund revenues, as well as significant beneficial results in employment growth and contributions to our long-term economic development sustainability. A new hotel or hotels could be an additional amenity for our local business and also for our community to gather and host out-of-town guests. Increasing and diversifying the general fund was one of the priorities also set forth by the City Council as far as part of your strategic property acquisition reserve, or SPAR fund, and that was adopted back in July of 2013. Conservatively, the revenues that would come from a 200 or 230 room hotel could be upwards of $1 million annually to the general fund. And assembling the properties presents a very unique opportunity for the city of San Carlos to realize its long-term land use plans for economic development and for the area to create a gateway project within this landmark zoning district. Tonight we have Jim Simon with RSG, who's been assisting the city on the acquisition of the property. We also have Nikki Murphy, our legal counsel, on the acquisition of the property. And after obtaining direction from the city council, city staff and the consultants went back and began negotiating with the sellers, who some are here this evening. And we have a purchase and sale agreement before you this evening that has been signed by each of the sellers of the property. And these purchase and sale agreements are intended to assemble and consolidate these 3 parcels together and direct the future sale and development of the property for hotel use compatible with the surrounding uses. So what I'd like to do now is ask Jim Simon to come up and talk a little bit about the purchase and sale terms and the financing plan, and then I'll get up and talk about next steps.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. Jim Simon with RSG. As Mr. Sadeh indicated, the property acquisition involves assembly of 3 parcels under separate ownership. So you have in your packet tonight a separate resolution and purchase and sale agreement for each property. In total, an aggregate purchase price of $13.69 million, or approximately $80 a square foot. As was alluded to in the staff report, a appraisal was prepared for this acquisition independently by a certified MAI appraiser, and the value of those properties in aggregate was slightly over $14 million. Although the individual property valuations were slightly different, when you're doing land assembly, that can often be the case. You'll see each property acquisition itemized on this graphic on the wall. 595 Industrial, which is owned by the Pay and Donahue owners, would be the first to be purchased. It would be an all-cash purchase with a 60-day close from the opening of escrow. Escrow would, as proposed, open 2 days after execution and approval, which it would be presumably tonight. So that would be opening escrow on Wednesday of this week, and then a 60-day close for that particular purchase. And the proposed use of funds would be the SPAR funds that you have. The city would be providing a 3% deposit across all properties. The numbers sort of vary depending on how the owners wanted to work that out amongst themselves, which
city certainly has no issue with. The one caveat that's important to understand is, as the city desires to certainly assemble all of these properties, the sellers have an equal desire to sell the properties in aggregate. Because we do not have cash to purchase all of these properties at one time, a portion of the purchase, in this case, the other two properties, would have to be financed. And so the idea with this transaction is to close on the first property within 60 days in order to get the process moving, if you will, and then complete the closing of the properties in 120 days with a financing contingency of 90 days on those other two properties at 850 and 810. In the event that the city does not complete that second purchase of 810 and 850, the owners do have the right to repurchase the property at $4,850,000, the purchase price the city would be paying for that parcel. For 850 and 810, as I mentioned, those two properties would be purchased through financed through private placement financing, which I'll talk about in a moment. Which we'll get into further into this process at a subsequent meeting, but the closing on those would be at 120 days from the opening of escrow, again, starting Wednesday of this week. There's a summary of the overall financing, the use of funds that would be used to comprise the purchase, including the deposits, 3% deposits on 810 and 850, a total of $5,115,200 would be coming from the SPAR fund, and the balance of that would be coming from the private placement financing, which I'll get into now. The proposal would be to, there's a variety of ways, as we indicated in the staff report, that public agencies can finance the purchase of property or undertake different things. Public agencies can't just go out and get mortgages, but what we can do as a city would be either to issue bond debt, which is a tool that I know the council is familiar with because the city has issued bonds in the past, particularly through its redevelopment agency, for example. That can typically be a more protracted process and problematic for this type of an acquisition because the intent here is to buy this property and then sell it at some, hopefully short-term period in the future. So the idea of issuing bonds often have a call provision of sometimes as much as 10 years. So it essentially means that you're stuck with that financing for at least 10 years. So that really becomes a mechanism that doesn't really work particularly well for this type of an acquisition or investment, a capital investment. An alternative to that, which is really widely used among many cities in California today, is what's known as a private placement financing, where a bid packet is prepared and bids for financing are solicited with various lenders. Lenders would be offering a lease financing mechanism, which is a way in which the city gets a lump sum lease payment, then makes debt service payments in the form of lease-back payments to that lender. So it's basically a lease-back structure. You probably may have heard about it in conferences around the state or other cities doing it. It's not like I said, it's not an uncommon practice. The advantage of that is it's a fairly short turnaround time frame. Bids would be solicited in a span of a few weeks. There would be preliminary term sheets that would be coming together from any number of different lenders with various conditions and financing terms and the like. You'd probably see, we always be careful when we quote rates these days because you never really know what it's going to be. But a recent transaction with a deal with a 2-year call provision, which would mean you could close the note out in 2 years, would be about a 3.6% financing, which is a pretty attractive rate even in today's market. As I mentioned, the process that you're looking at tonight would really just be to authorize the city manager to execute the 3 purchase and sale agreements, and in addition to start the process to solicit development proposals for the property. The financing itself would come back to you at a future date and time. There'll be a process that would start today, which would be to
begin to solicit those bids from the city's bank, any number of different lenders around the state. There's as many as 100 different lenders in California that would at least entertain a financing like this with San Carlos's AA credit rating, and be interested potentially in offering a term sheet to the city. Those would be reviewed by a financing team, including city staff, and then they'll be brought back to city council. That is your financing contingency, so you'll have the chance to come back and most likely sometime in January, I would expect, and see that financing package in more detail, and can ask certainly questions of the financing, offers and options that you have at that point in time. I think that concludes my comments on the structure of the transaction. I'll let Mr. Savay wrap up.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. This cord right here is not powering up my iPad, and I've got about 7% battery left, and so my lights are going to go out over here.
Look under, might not be
It's plugged in.
Plugged in Bluetooth first.
Says the cable or accessory is not certified and may not work. I don't know if it's working or not. Didn't appear to me. I'll move out of the way.
That was plugged in,
Doesn't look like it's charging.
You want to try this one? I'm not using it.
I'm not using it.
Here.
I think that one's working.
Okay. Thanks.
So I'm going to wrap it up here, Mr. Mayor and council members, and I think Mr. Simon did a real good job of describing the financing program, and he even talked about some of the next steps, so I'm just going to touch on them really briefly. I think it's really important to note that we're not asking you to make any decisions on a development project here. This is about acquiring the property and going forward from that. So I just wanted to make that real clear. The first step in the financing process we talked about, or Jim talked about getting the city manager to sign the agreements and obtain bond counsel and the financing placement agent. And the placement agent would prepare the request for proposals, solicit those, and we bring back that maybe the top 2 or 3 candidates to the city council for final selection. The next step would be we would go out to the marketplace with a request for proposals to the development for the hotel developers, hopefully with some experience in this area. And we've been contacted by several developers seeking sites for hotel development. These would be among the groups that we would reach out to. We would have a selection team made up of the Economic Development Advisory Subcommittee of the council, someone from EDAC and city staff to vet those proposals and bring back the top candidate or top candidates to the city council for final consideration, and then once that's done, move into the entitlement phase and finally issue building permits and move forward. And that concludes the staff presentation. Staff is recommending that the city council adopt the resolutions approving the purchase and sale agreements for each of the 3 properties and authorize the city manager to execute the PSAs and direct staff to release that RFP to the hotel development. And that concludes the staff report.
And if I may, on one subject there, we're not asking the council to approve an RFP tonight. That's not on the agenda. It's part of it's included in the staff report and worded that way, but that's not the agendized item. I send out RFPs all the time as the city manager, and that's the normal practice and process that we go through, and that would be the process we would propose to go through tonight.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sauvé. Mr. Simon? Questions? Mr. Olbert?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. question's probably for Mr. Simon, but whoever wants to answer it, I just want to make sure I understand that the type of financing that's being contemplated, what, if any, liens are created on general funds, commitments, et cetera? I think you know where I'm going with that question.
Sure. It's a good question. And Nikki Murphy's here. She can also certainly answer this as special counsel. But in general, the obligation is secured by an initial lump sum lease payment that the city receives, which is the proceeds to buy the property, and then it pays back that property. The lien, if you will, the security for that would be on the property itself. That would at least be what we would strive to do, so that the general fund wouldn't necessarily be on the hook to make the debt service payments, but it would be monetized by the underlying land on the property.
So you can actually make it a non-recourse loan, or is it really just effectively limited recourse simply to the property?
Well, it varies. I get myself in trouble every time I come up to this podium because I always seem like to say that's the answer on everything.
Well, that's the answer to almost every question in life. Is it depends.
Good answer.
But yes, there are cities that sometimes you do just pledge that property. Sometimes there's other property that gets pledged as a result as well. It really depends on the credit, the situation, the market, and lots
Negotiations.
of variables.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I have a couple. So it says here that we would have to close, and I'm not sure who would answer this, but entire deposit at risk if city defaults. So explain to me how we could default. What if we find toxic chemicals? And I assume we're going to be doing a good due diligence on all that. So let's say we find something and it's going to cost $500,000 to fix. We go, thanks very much, we're not buying it.
Well, there are contingency periods which we didn't discuss in the presentation, but that's a good question. So there are contingency periods during this process where we have due diligence that's being done, title review, a phase one process, which would actually start after tonight's meeting, which would be an environmental assessment and that type of thing. We also have to look at the leases and see what's on the property, in terms of the tenancies and those types of things. Those monies go hard within a. Nikki, correct me if I'm wrong. I want to make sure, because we went back and forth on this a little bit. I believe it was within 60 days.
No, I understand that, but what gets us? What are our outs?
Well, all of those things, as long as those activities are anticipated to be completed within the first 60 days that I mentioned. So if you discover something, if there's a phase one that comes out and it says there's a large plume of toxic waste under the property, we can stop the process, and our deposit on those other two properties, for example, would not be at risk. I
guess I'm getting at what I don't like it. I don't like the property because it's got brown dirt instead of black dirt. So can I get out?
Well, I should probably have legal counsel.
I'm trying to identify what the items are that I can walk away from it. Mr. Rubens? I'm going to. I just want to know what
before we release the contingencies, the city would have the ability to terminate the agreement and get out of the contract, if you will. It only becomes the deposits would only become at risk after we removed contingencies, and it's all of the contingencies, not just any one of the contingencies.
But a contingency can be
financing or property condition, review of the leases, those types of things.
I changed my mind. I mean,
before you release the contingencies, it could be that. Yeah.
Well, and the contingencies step in over time. So if you changed your mind early, you're risking less. If you changed your mind later in the process, you will have passed through money that it would be non-refundable.
Well, what if it's in the first 60 days? It's refundable, right?
Then it would be, that money would not have passed through.
So that's what I'm saying. If we change our mind, if all of a sudden we wake up in 2 weeks and go, you know what? That wasn't such a great move we had. We're not buying it. Can we do that?
Basically, yes.
Okay, so we can as long as it's within the time frames. If we change it, we can change our minds.
Due diligence period, which we
I understand.
can, review
Okay.
title, etc.
And by the way, just a free advice, I think we need to do way more than a phase one. Because phase one is, to me, a walk by, doesn't look like anything was ever there. I mean, seriously, this is a really, really, I don't know whether it's phase 2 or phase 3 because I forget what the levels are, but whatever they are, we need to do, if we need to do borings or whatever we need to do, that's extremely important. Are we planning on doing that, Mr. Savay? Yes. Okay, good, thanks. Because phase 1, nothing, Mr. Simon, no problem, but phase 1 doesn't look like there's anything there, at least from my experience. Mr. Savay, on the steps, ballpark, and again, I'm not going to hold you to this, but what's the timing on these? And are they concurrent or are they consecutive?
The first two on the screen are concurrent.
And how long ballpark are you estimating? And again, I'm not going to hold you to it, I'm just trying to
I
understand.
think January 7th was the deadline for submittals for the RFP.
Okay.
We're ready to select bond counsel and the placement agent immediately.
Okay. And the entitlement project process? I know.
You knew what I was going to say, right? It depends.
I understand.
So it depends on what we come back with. Do they stay within the zoning standards, or do they need extra height? They need a PD that goes to the city council, adds more time.
Sure.
So, we're hoping within a 6-month period, something like that.
So 6 to 12, we're hoping, but it could go longer. And then sell property to a hotel and issue permits. That's when we go to sell the property, let's say to a developer, if we did this, if we buy this, and issue the permits, and it would take them probably another year at least to get the permits and things like that going?
Well, I'm not going to say it, but if there's a good degree of certainty and things are moving through the process, we've got good community support, and that's another thing we will be working closely with the greater East San Carlos neighborhood. If we have good, strong community support, Planning Commission looks good, starts to come to the council. It may be that a developer starts to develop his building permit plans early in the process. Mm-hmm. There's some risk there, but it moves up the timetable significantly, so that can be done.
All right.
And of course, we'll process the permits quickly.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any issue with the airport? Because it seems to me that I remember there was some building somewhere being built in the area, whether Redwood City or Belmont or whatever, and folks are going, well, FAA came in and said, no, sorry, can't build that, too high.
We work very closely with the Airport Land Use Committee and the chair of the committee, and any development we would bring to the committee. PANF is 80 feet, or 80 to 90 feet.
But it's farther north.
And it's a little farther north, that's true, but the other hotel is right next to the airport, and that's in the 50-foot range right there. So I don't, and we've already talked to the Airport Land Use Committee about this, and I just don't think that there's going to be an issue. But we will bring it to the committee to find out.
Okay, the reason I broke that up, because you just threw the number out, and I'm sure it's not a final number, but you threw out 230 units, and I don't know what kind of a footprint that takes. And so I'm thinking, geez, a developer would love to come in and do this, would like to do 230, but 230 won't fit because he's got to go too high. So that's all, I'm just throwing that out. So. And let's see, the lease back, I guess, Mr. Simon, what are we talking about in year ballpark? And again, I know it depends, but are we talking about a couple of years to pay this back?
Well, actually, you'll have some options, but when it comes back to you, but you have the option of just doing it interest only, so you're only paying interest of maybe $400,000 to $500,000, or maybe not even that much, depending on how much you wind up financing. Annually, and then just taking out the financing once you close the sale on the subsequent buyer, whoever the developer winds up being.
But these are normally short-term situations?
Well, it would be it'd probably be a 5-year loan, but we would have a call provision in 2, which means you could get out of it in as soon as 2 years.
Or less. In other words, there wouldn't be prepayment penalties or anything like that?
Well, we're thinking 2 years is probably realistic, given the time frame that we just talked about.
Understand.
So.
But there probably wouldn't be prepayment penalties or anything like that?
We can go to the lenders with any number of different parameters that we're interested in asking for. Obviously, the shorter the term on that call provision, the less interest you'll get from lenders because they're in the business of money.
No, I understand. One last question. I apologize for now. You get into, as Mr. Grocott gets into his design, you get into my wheelhouse in real estate. Can you give me an example of private lenders? Are we talking about banks?
Yes. Could be
even though we theoretically can't borrow money or put a mortgage on it, there's legal vehicles that, or it could be ABC company could come in and say, we're a private lender and lend you money?
Well, I would look to, one of the reasons that we're proceeding with a financing team is we look to people that have done this type of transaction in the past, financial advisor types. And they've worked with about 100 different lenders around the state that have done this type of financing before. You don't really have to educate somebody on how to go about doing it.
No, I'm not saying that.
Who are those people?
Yes.
They're your typical banks and lenders out there. They're from local community banks,
Which can be very few private people that would do it?
Well, I'm not aware of any private people that would do it.
So you're basically
Yeah.
talking about banks?
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to understand, when you say private placement, that means...
It's basically what it is that it's not a public bid type of a process where you
Understand.
go out and do
So for the most
do a
part,
bond
banks
sale.
do lend this under these parameters. They're not mortgages, but they're some other little legal...
Leaseback
Lease,
structure,
leaseback,
yeah.
okay. Okay, sorry, I apologize to my colleagues for monopolizing those questions, sorry.
Good questions, thank you.
Excellent.
I came up with another one.
Okay.
Or, may I ask?
Oh, please, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
I think, Mr. Sabay, this is either you or Mr. Rubens, or special counsel. That conversation that was going on just now between Mr. Simon and the mayor about, hypothetically, for example, discovering hazardous wastes and whatnot, it caused me to go back and re-examine that portion of the document. And when I look at the section, I didn't see anything under the contingency section, which is section 3, basically, that talks about hazardous waste. The only reference to hazardous waste that I came across was section 5.1.11, and the very last sentence of that says, except as to disclosure of prior written professional reports, the property shall be taken by buyer in its as-is condition in regard to hazardous materials and all matters described above in this section. I just want to make sure I understand what that means, because when I read that, it says that we're buying this as is. The earlier language talks about how we're supposed to do our own investigation of compliance with or violation of any federal, state, or local law, et cetera, but it doesn't sound to me like that's a contingency.
I'm going to ask our legal counsel to address that.
Okay.
It is intended to be.
If you're going to be speaking, Nikki, you need to come up, I'm sorry. That's all
Good
right.
evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. Nicole Murphy, Special Counsel. It is intended to be a contingency, and I believe
It's the bottom of
references.
It's the bottom of page 12 is where 5.1.11 is.
In section 3.2, the statement is made, buyer's obligation to purchase the property is expressly conditioned on its approval in its sole discretion of the matters disclosed in the preliminary documents. And the preliminary documents include all matters related to the condition of the property, including environmental site assessments, phase 1 and phase 2 reports, and so forth.
I see. Okay, so that's the tieback. That's what
the
creates
tieback.
the contingency.
Yes.
Okay.
And again, not limited to those 3.1, or phase 1, phase
Correct.
2, anything, if we just change our mind.
Well, I mean,
I keep asking this, and you keep nodding your head.
It is within the parameters of the terms set forth here in the agreement, which are, we must approve the condition of title, it must be satisfactory,
I understand all the
condition of
legality
the
part.
property.
I don't think it's quite as broad as you
It is
keep
not
implying.
quite
Well,
as
that's what I'm
broad as
trying to
just,
understand.
it is
I wanna
not
make
quite
sure.
as, it is not quite as broad as you just simply change your mind.
Okay, so that's not what you just did 5 minutes ago when I
Yes,
asked
and
that question.
Well,
I'm not trying to
that's
put you on a
correct. No,
stand,
that's
Counselor, but
correct. You're correct.
Which is it?
it is not as broad as you simply just
Okay,
change
so
your
it's
mind.
somehow got to be written in here, or normal practice,
That's
or
correct.
something like that.
That's correct.
So
You're
buyer's
committing,
remorse-
when you approve this agreement, you are committing to buy the property under the conditions provided.
So
in that
buyer's
agreement.
remorse is not going to get us out of this?
Correct.
Okay, I just want to
I
understand.
mean, you
everybody-
can, not without damages, let me put it that way.
Not without what, I'm
Not
sorry?
without damages, some kind of damages.
Damages, right, I understand. Okay, great, right. No, certainly, you can always walk away from anything, it's just a matter of how much it costs you, sure. I understand, okay. Just want to make sure everybody understands what we're doing here. This is $14 million, so.
Let me ask you a question.
Oh, please.
Staff, I would assume that you would, keep your eyes open for anything that looks squirrely along the way. things start to go sideways or something makes you uncomfortable, you'd tell us immediately.
That's correct. We would tell you immediately.
Thank you.
Other questions? Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this item? Okay. Well, what do you folks want to do?
Well, we have
got
3 resolutions,
Three of them.
is that right?
Since we have 3 and they kind of overlap, do you want to potentially, if there is a desire to have discussion, have some general discussion first? Or do you want to go with the traditional route?
No, we can go general discussion because there's going to be 3 separate.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good point.
Well, I guess the comment I was going to make to start off with is apropos of the interchange you were having there, Mr. Mayor. I think it's important that we recognize that this is a risk. We are taking a risk here. And there are several different dimensions to it. I think the important thing is different people look at assessing risks in different ways. To me, it's a question of, is it a calculated risk that looks like it is likely to pay off in a big way? In this particular instance, based on the discussions I've had with staff and review of the documents in this discussion here tonight, yes, there is risk in doing this, but I think the rewards are actually very large as well. I do have some things that I'd like to see us do in our process of review, assuming we move forward with executing or giving the city manager permission to execute these documents. I would like to make sure that we really bend over backwards to be as transparent as we possibly can, particularly on the financing side of this when this comes before us. I know that's going to be of a big concern to members of the public. It would be to me if I didn't have all the information that I have. I think we need to bring them along as well. I think also that before we actually have an RFP go out, I would like to see the council have some discussion about what, if anything, elements we might want to include of a non-financial nature in the RFP. And I'll give you just one example because it's the one that immediately occurred to me when I knew that we were going to be talking about this item. We had a very, let's say, less than optimal experience with the developer in terms of interacting with a nearby affected neighborhood recently. And I've had some discussions with staff about how I think we could, for example, put in an RFP that we will give points towards, we'll give weighting towards developers who can either demonstrate or actually will actually start working with the East San Carlos community to get buy-in for the project. I would very much like to see something like that injected into the process, and I think probably put in the RFP saying that you don't have to do this if you don't want to, but it's one of the ways we're going to evaluate you beyond just your financial proposal. So I'd like to see a discussion of the details of the RFP before we send it out. I suspect we're going to have to do that in some kind of special meeting here because of the short shot clock we've got on this. And this is the holiday season, but I'm happy to devote the time to that because, like I said, starting out here, this is a risk. There are some downsides to this potentially, but it looks like a very, very attractive opportunity and not one that I'd want to see pass away.
If I could make a counter proposal, what the staff had planned to do was to work with the Economic Development Subcommittee of the Council in preparation of the RFP and review of the RFP, and that would be a more streamlined process for us if the council's comfortable with that. And our 2 subcommittee members, I believe, are Councilmember Collins and Councilmember Olbert.
Which, if I may respond to that, someone in rebuttal, Mr. Malpe, when I realized that that's what Mr. Survey was talking about, I thought, well, good on me, because I get to sit in on those discussions. In this particular instance, if that's what the council wants to do, I'm obviously fine doing it. I would prefer that we actually do it in open session, open public session, have some discussion about those things. Again, partially to bring the community along, but also because this is big enough, I don't really want to cut out other council members from the input to what the RFP will look like. That's just my feeling.
Well, could we, Mr. City Manager, could we have that discussion with the 2 subcommittee members and then bring the proposal to us?
Sure, we absolutely could do that.
Get the best of both.
That would work.
Would that work?
Yeah.
Okay?
Sure.
All right. I'm sorry, other comments?
No, my only comment was I like the idea of doing it through a subcommittee because, there's certain things that we can hash over and we can vet those issues and come up with some ideas. It's still going to, the five of us are still going to decide ultimately what goes in the RFP and what sort of conditions we want. But it might help streamline the process. I mean, in the end, it's all going to be a public process anyway. So that's my thought.
Okay. As Mr. Olbert said, risk reward benefit, I have the same issue. Prudent risk is always, as why I kept sort of pounding on the, the situation of whether we can get out or not, because when you sign, you sign. And real estate isn't necessarily short-term, it's long-term. And you have to look at the benefit of it. 3.91 acres in the San Francisco Peninsula, worth close to $14 million now, which is just mind-boggling in itself. There isn't a lot, as I said, I think in the press, there isn't a lot of this property around, especially that can be assembled like this. We've been trying, as Mr. Savay said, for many years to try to do this, and it seems like the stars align this time at a certain cost. And so it's a risk, but I think in the long run, it'll, as Mr. Olbert said, I believe that we will probably come out on a much more positive basis than if we didn't do this at all. But other comments? Mr. Grocott.
Yeah, I'm going to comment on this. When this first came to our attention, because the Pays wanted to develop their gym and do some improvements to it and do a bigger business, I didn't understand why we were turning them down. I still don't. I did feel like, if we want to do such and such to the land, then we ought to own it and let the Pays out of their situation where we were holding them back from the pursuit of what they wanted to do with their own property. That said, I still strongly believe, I'm pretty conservative here, and I think the city gets involved in land deals to do things like build city halls, libraries, community centers, fire stations, etc. I don't think while, taxes that come into the city, of course, fund our programs and so forth, I don't think it's the place of the city to go out there and, goose the process, as it were, and involve itself in the market the way we are here and risking the taxpayers' money the way that we are. So I'm going to be voting against all of these. I said this in closed session when we were talking about it. To me, it just doesn't seem right. Here we're going to be the ones making approvals about development items and buildings and so forth, yet we have skin in the game. And we're not intended to have skin in the game. We're supposed to be a third party looking at a project and making decisions on it for our citizens and so forth. And when we involve ourselves to this extent, to me, it's a conflict of interest.
Mr. Olbert.
Yeah, actually, one comment that Mr. Grocott made there reminded me of something I was thinking about, which I don't know that we have to decide tonight, but it might be something to consider precisely because, as I mentioned, I, for one, would really like to, I know the rest of us feel the same way, I'd like to be as utterly transparent about this as we can be. That conflict of interest issue, there were analogous things when I was on the school board where on occasion, it was rare, we would put together an ad hoc group of parents, or citizens basically, as an advisory group to the board to provide some input on something that was happening. And that might be something that we think about doing here, precisely for that reason. I'm confident that if we act transparently and we bring up the issues and consider them, that we have nothing to fear from doing that, and it might be something that would make the community feel more comfortable. Again, not something we have to decide tonight, but there are ways of managing even that kind of perception.
Well, we do have an Economic Development Commission that is made up of citizens.
Fair enough.
And that's part of what they do. And I'm sure they're going to be involved somewhat. Mr. Malpe?
Well, and I was also going to say this project would go to the Planning Commission, so.
Right. But your point's well taken, but that's what I think why we have EDAC, because they have, people that looking at different items. But anyway, other comments?
The only thing I'd like to say is that the way I see this project is that the first thing it does is it produces jobs. Jobs produce commerce. Commerce produces tax revenue, which comes back to the city, and we use that money for the public good. I think this is the ideal, this is the purpose of what we do as city government. We're investing in ourselves is really what we're doing. We're investing for our citizens. And that's why I think this is a necessary, and yes, there's somewhat of a risk, but it's a calculated risk. I think it's an intelligent risk. So I'm going to be voting yes.
Okay. Any other comments? Otherwise, I'll...
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move adoption of council to adopt resolution 2013-120. 120? Thank you. Resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos approving and authorizing execution of a purchase and sale agreement to acquire 595 Industrial Road.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any more comments? Roll call, please.
Councilmember Clapper?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move resolution, the council adopt resolution 2013-
121.
Just want to make sure, 121. Resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos approving and authorizing execution of a purchase and sale agreement to acquire 810 East San Carlos Avenue.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Further discussion? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Clapper?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move the council adopt resolution 2013-
122.
122. Resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos approving and authorizing execution of a purchase and sale agreement to acquire 850 East San Carlos Avenue.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Clapper?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
No.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Grisilli?
Yes. I believe that brings us to the end of our meeting. Mr. Olbert asked last meeting that we do this, and I unfortunately forgot about it at the late hour that we had. I'd like to adjourn this meeting actually for two things. Number one, the idea that Mr. Olbert had to adjourn this meeting and hopefully in hope, I guess, is for the folks in the Philippines and their tragedy there. I can't even imagine having the things that happened to them happen to us, but it did, and hopefully that they'll be able to rebuild, and hopefully we'll be able to help them do it. And the second one, adjourning, we have a holiday coming up on Thursday, Thanksgiving, and hopefully folks can be thankful in their own ways for their own situations and whatever they have and in their families. So that being said, meeting adjourned.
Well said.